Welcome to Sherlock Shadow Channel, where every story hides a secret. Grab your coffee, sit back, and dive into a world of twists and turns. Tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city and country in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share the thrill with fellow mystery lovers. Let the adventure begin. Hercule Poirot and the Puzzle of the Needle in the Tapestry. Chapter 1. The Inciting Incident. I had scarcely set foot through the grand entrance of Sir Reginald Danvers's Wiltshire estate when the evening's tranquillity was rent by a scream so piercing that even the timidest of the household staff fled their posts. As Captain Hastings, friend, chronicler, and occasional comic relief to the great Hercule Poirot, I confess I was more startled than alarmed. After all, a weekend gathering of high society wasn't usually accompanied by shrieks of terror. Yet there it was, echoing up the marble hallways like a discordant note in a serenade. We had arrived that afternoon under cerulean skies, the sun casting dappled shadows across the manicured lawns. Sir Reginald himself had been the epitome of genial hospitality, a portly man with ruddy cheeks, his booming laughter filling every corner of his vast drawing-room. The occasion, he explained over steaming cups of Earl Grey, was a private unveiling of a recently discovered medieval tapestry, one fabled to conceal a cryptic needlework clue left by its unknown weaver. A mere curiosity, he assured us, but I fancied the diversion. Poirot, for his part, regarded the tapestry with keen grey eyes. He stood before it in that stately gallery, hands clasped behind his back, his lush moustaches twitching ever so slightly. There was a solemnity about him, a silent devotion to the least stitch and fold, that I found admirable, if a trifle eccentric. I, on the other hand, found the whole affair delightfully theatrical. The tapestry hung from ornate bronze brackets, its reds and golds muted by centuries of dust and dim lighting. Figures of knights and ladies frolicked amongst stylized foliage, and at first glance, nothing seemed amiss. Yet Poirot had observed something. He was already murmuring to himself when our hostess, Lady Danvers, a stately woman in her late 50s, draped in emerald satin, had swept through the room. Her eyes widened at the tapestry, but it was Poirot's arched brow that caught my attention. "Mon ami," he whispered, beckoning me closer with a single gloved finger. "Observe the lower border. There is a missing stitch." Indeed, where a silver thread ought to have woven through the hem, there yawned a small, inky black gap. I leaned in, peering at the irregular shape cut into the fabric. Before I could inquire further, the scream cleaved the air. We rushed toward the direction from which it had come, down a narrow inner corridor flanked by portraits of stern-faced ancestors and oil lamps that flickered with anxious light. At the end of the corridor lay the library, its door ajar. Framed busts and leather-bound volumes lined the walls, yet all that commanded our attention was the prone figure on the oriental rug, Sir Reginald himself, blood pooling beneath his head. I knelt beside him, my heart pounding. A gilt letter opener protruded from his chest, its blade glinting in the lamplight. Lady Danvers collapsed into a chair, her face ashen, hands trembling around a lace handkerchief. 4 other guests, none of whom I recognized, stood clustered near the fireplace, each ashen as Lady Danvers, each whispering fragments of protest or accusation. Poirot, serene amid the chaos, crouched beside me. He examined the wound with calm efficiency. Chapter 2. The First Clues. I rose unsteadily from my kneeling position as Poirot signaled for calm. Lady Danvers had fainted into the arms of a footman, and the other guests stood frozen, faces pale as the moonlight spilling through the library window. A hush fell, broken only by the quiet rasp of someone drawing breath too sharply. Poirot's voice, precise and low, cut through the tension. "Mon ami Hastings, let us secure the scene. We must not allow excitement to disturb the evidence." I nodded and stepped back, allowing him to approach the body with deliberate caution. He leaned closer, his imperious gaze sweeping from the letter opener to the small pool of crimson that spread across the aged oriental rug. Then, as though the wound itself had offered a clue, he straightened and addressed the assembled company. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "no one is to leave the estate. Not until I have spoken with each of you privately." A murmur erupted, questions, protests, feeble denials, but Poirot raised a slender hand. "You will remain here, in this room or the adjoining gallery, until I so direct. The police have been summoned, but until their arrival, the matter rests in my hands." Sir Reginald's valet, Mr. Cartwright, emerged from the adjoining gallery to lay a clean cloth over his master's body. Poirot watched without comment, eyes fixed on the tiny fleck of silver thread that still clung to the tapestry's hem, the stitch that should have been missing and yet somehow was still in place. "Come," he said at last, turning to me. "Let us return to the tapestry." I followed him out of the library, across the corridor where the scent of polished wood and old paper lingered. In the gallery, the tapestry hung silent and proud, its secret now tainted by blood. Poirot stood before it, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Observe, Hastings," he said quietly. "The missing stitch is no longer missing. How curious." I peered closely. Indeed, what had been a ragged hole only moments ago was now neatly mended, a stitch of silver thread seamlessly woven to match the original. The repair was so precise as to escape the casual eye, yet to Poirot it stood out like a smudge on a porcelain vase. "Someone has taken pains to restore the disappearance," Poirot murmured. "Either the perpetrator panicked and tried to conceal their tampering, or someone else discovered the gap and repaired it before I noticed." My mind spun. But how much time could there have been? The tapestry was unveiled not an hour ago. "Precisely," Poirot replied. "Our murderer is both bold and diligent." He glanced about the gallery. Who among these guests could have had opportunity? We stepped back into the drawing room. The small group of onlookers had gathered around the fire, their interactions muted and wary. Lady Danvers sat supported by cushions on a chaise longue, sobbing softly. A young woman in lilac, Miss Genevieve Phillips, the late Sir Reginald's niece, watched her aunt with fearful eyes. Beside her stood Colonel Ashton, a retired soldier whose rigid posture suggested more nerves than he cared to admit. Near the window, Mr. Theodore Crowley, a wealthy industrialist draped in mourning black, peered out into the gardens as if expecting the police to materialize at any moment. Poirot motioned for each in turn, selecting the order of interviews with the care of a chess master. I remained at his side, notebook in hand, ready to record the smallest detail. An unsteady gaze, a trembling hand, a hesitation in speech. "Interview with Miss Genevieve Phillips." Miss Phillips nodded curtly when Poirot began. Her voice quivered, but her answers were swift. She had been in the conservatory when the scream rang out, she said, tending to her aunt's roses. She admitted, however, that she had slipped into the gallery earlier, ostensibly to admire the tapestry, and, perhaps, she hesitated, to examine the tapestry's rumoured secret. She claimed innocence of any tampering. Yet, when pressed about the timing of the repair, her pale cheeks flushed momentarily. Interview with Colonel Ashton. Next came Colonel Ashton, who boasted a steadfast alibi. He had been in the billiard room with Sir Reginald, discussing matters of estate management. He recalled hearing the muffled thud of a chair and the subdued exclamation, then the longer, sharper scream. But he could not swear to the precise moment the tapestry was unveiled. His attention had been on Sir Reginald's plan to transform a wing of the estate into guest apartments. Interview with Mr. Theodore Crowley. Mr. Crowley's composure was unsettling. He admitted to lingering in the gallery, ostensibly to photograph the tapestry's intricate design. He produced a small camera, apologizing if its lens had shone brightly on the fabric. His photographs, he claimed, would corroborate that the tapestry remained intact until he left the gallery, though he had not yet developed the film. His manner was polite, but distanced, as though he regarded us as curious insects beneath a magnifying glass. Interview with Mrs. Adelaide Barrington. I had not yet mentioned Mrs. Barrington, Sir Reginald's longtime friend and companion, a widow of genteel bearing, yet Poirot did not overlook her. She had been in the billiard room as well, but claimed she had retired early to her suite, overcome by a sudden headache. She admitted to passing through the gallery on her way upstairs and observed only that the tapestry looked splendid in the torchlight. Poirot stood in the centre of the drawing-room, eyes flicking from one suspect to another. "Each of you had opportunity," he declared, "and yet each of you also had reason to admire the tapestry. But the tapestry was not the motive for murder, unless, of course, that motive is far more intricate." He paused, raising a slender finger. "I note 3 peculiarities. First, the letter opener, an instrument not easily concealed under a gentleman's coat. Secondly, the repaired stitch. And thirdly, the absence of any struggle." I realized then that Sir Reginald's body lay too still, his clothing undisturbed, no sign of a defensive wound. The killer had acted swiftly, surely, and at very close quarters. Poirot turned to me. "We must examine the letter opener itself." Back in the library, we retrieved the ornate desk where the killer had evidently deposited the weapon. The letter opener was heavy with silver filigree, its handle encrusted with semi-precious stones. Poirot studied the stones, tapping one gently. A small fleck of dark residue, nearly indistinguishable against the silver, fell onto a white scrap of paper. "Blood from Sir Reginald," Poirot observed. "Yet this red smudge, almost black on the filigree, suggests something else." He dabbed at the residue with a finger, tasting it ever so slightly, an indulgence I never cease to find remarkable. Gunpowder, smoke, residue. He frowned. Gunpowder on a letter opener? The murderer may have handled a recently fired weapon, or perhaps this pertains to a previous crime. My head swam. But what connection could Sir Reginald have with firearms? Poirot shrugged ever so slightly. "That, Hastings, we shall discover. For now, we have the first clues. A secret in tapestry stitches, a murder weapon bearing unexpected residue, and a quartet of suspects whose alibis are incomplete at best. Tomorrow, when the police arrive, they will no doubt commence formal inquiries. But I, Hercule Poirot, shall continue in my own fashion, quietly, meticulously, and above all, logically. As I closed my notebook for the evening, I realized that the storm had truly begun. The threads of intrigue were many, and Poirot's little grey cells would need every ounce of their extraordinary power to untangle them. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. Morning light found the grand hall of Danvers Manor bathed in pallid gold. Even the ornate chandeliers seemed subdued after the night's grim revelations. The hush that fell over the household was almost palpable, as though the very walls had drawn in their breath. waiting. Before the official constable's carriage could arrive, Poirot convened the household and guests in the drawing room, insisting that no one leave the premises. The room, typically the scene of polite conversation and refined leisure, now bristled with tension. A long mahogany table stood in the centre, its surface gleaming beneath the flicker of morning candles. Chairs were drawn up around it in a semicircle. Lady Danvers, though pale and drawn, had summoned her composure enough to sit at the head of the table. To her right stood Miss Genevieve Phillips, her silken gloves folded neatly in her lap. Opposite her, Colonel Ashton leaned against a carved oak pillar, arms crossed. Mr. Theodore Crowley occupied the seat nearest the fireplace, and Mrs. Adelaide Barrington settled quietly into a velvet-upholstered armchair by the window. Poirot entered with a flourish, his grey suit immaculate, his moustaches waxed to perfection. He bowed slightly to Lady Danvers before turning to face the assembly. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice calm yet imbued with authority, "we find ourselves in a predicament most delicate. Until the constable arrives, and thereafter, no one may depart. We are a closed circle, and within this circle walks a murderer." A collective shiver rippled through the group. Lady Danvers' lips parted, as though to speak, but she fell silent at Poirot's raised hand. "First," Poirot continued, producing his notebook with a deft movement, "I must know each of your connections to Sir Reginald Danvers. Motives, allegiances, debts. Nothing must remain hidden." He looked to Miss Phillips. She drew in a shaky breath and spoke in measured tones. "Sir Reginald was my uncle. Since my parents' passing, it was he who ensured my education and comfort. I owe him my livelihood, and indeed my place at this gathering." Her gaze wavered as she met Poirot's keen eyes. "I have no quarrel with him, save for the occasional argument over his stewardship of the family fortune." Next, Colonel Ashton stepped forward. His military bearing remained intact, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. "I served under Sir Reginald's father during the Great War. He sponsored my commission and recommended me for promotion. I consider him a friend and a benefactor. I have no interest in his demise." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Yet I understand, Colonel, that Sir Reginald recently refused your petition to renovate the West Wing into guest lodgings." The Colonel's jaw clenched. He hesitated, yes, but there was no ill will, only fiscal caution. Mr. Crowley's turn followed. He spoke quietly, placing a slim leather portfolio on the table. "I am in partnership with Sir Reginald on several industrial ventures. We have invested heavily in the Danvers textile mills. Our profits are intertwined." He tapped the portfolio. "Evidence of our agreements is here. I assure you my interest lies in his continued health and in the success of our enterprises." Finally, Mrs. Barrington rose from her chair. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were steady. "Sir Reginald and I have known each other since childhood. We were companions before marriage and remained close after our husbands passed. He confided in me about personal affairs I cannot share in full, for they concern family secrets." She paused, as though weighing her words. "But know this, I would never harm a man who trusted me so deeply." Poirot made a series of deliberate notes. He closed the notebook and surveyed the group. "You will each dine with me this afternoon in the library," he announced. "During that time, I shall observe your interactions, your responses to one another, and any, how shall I say, peculiar tensions." He allowed a faint smile to flicker across his face. "For therein lie the threads that will guide my little grey cells." A servant, ushered Lady Danvers to a nearby settee, offering her tea. The other guests dispersed quietly to their rooms or to the conservatory, their movements hesitant. Later that morning, I accompanied Poirot to the grand conservatory, where sunlight streamed through glass panes onto a riot of roses and orchids. He paused beside a marble pedestal bearing an alabaster bust of Sir Reginald's father. "Observe, Hastings," he said, tapping the base of the bust. "That faint smear, almost invisible, appears to be the same gunpowder residue we found on the letter opener." He leaned closer, sniffing delicately. Here, too, perhaps the killer paused after disposing of the weapon or used the space to clean his hands. I looked around. The conservatory pathways were narrow, hemmed by exotic plants. It would be easy to brush against the marble unnoticed. Poirot continued, "I must reconstruct the sequence of movements. The conservatory lies between the gallery, where the tapestry hung, and the library, a most convenient passage." Our examination was interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Cartwright, Sir Reginald's valet, carrying a tray with porcelain cups and a silver teapot. He deposited the tray on a nearby table and withdrew discreetly. Poirot poured 2 cups of tea, offering one to me. "Sip, Hastings," he murmured. "The aroma will steady your nerves." I accepted gratefully, the warmth spreading through my fingers. Poirot's eyes remained on the greenery. "This afternoon at the luncheon, I wish you to watch carefully the manner in which each suspect approaches the tapestry." He tapped his temple. "Their fascination, or lack thereof, may reveal hidden intent." I nodded. "And the tapestry's secret?" "Patience," Poirot replied. "First, we must be assured of motive and opportunity. Once we understand those, the tapestry's riddle will illuminate the culprit's identity." At precisely 1 o'clock, the suspects assembled for luncheon in the library. The long table had been cleared of books, revealing its polished walnut surface. An array of delicate china plates and gleaming cutlery awaited the party. Lady Danvers presided, her emerald gown shimmering in the afternoon light. Miss Phillips sat to Lady Danvers's right, her expression guarded. Colonel Ashton took the seat opposite, and Mr. Crowley sat next to him, adjusting his cufflinks with deliberate calm. Mrs. Barrington completed the circle, her posture serene but watchful. Poirot entered last, carrying a small leather satchel. He placed it on the table and took his seat at the head, immediately commencing a series of gentle inquiries. He asked each guest to describe their recollections of the night before, the precise timing of the tapestry's unveiling, the quality of the wine served, and the order in which the servants entered the gallery. With every response, Poirot's eyes sparkled with interest. He noted a tremor in Miss Phillips's voice when asked about the servants. He recorded Colonel Ashton's overly precise recollection of clock chimes. He raised an eyebrow at Mr. Crowley's vague description of the wine's bouquet, and he paused thoughtfully when Mrs. Barrington claimed to have retired early without glancing at the tapestry at all. Between courses, a delicate consommé followed by roast pheasant, Poirot allowed small lapses of silence, observing the body language of his companions. He watched as Colonel Ashton's gaze flickered to the leather satchel, as if aware he might have something to fear. He noted that Miss Phillips reached several times for a silk handkerchief embroidered with a golden monogram, one she had not before shown us, and he saw Mr. Crowley's hand unconsciously tighten around the stem of his wine-glass. As the luncheon drew to a close, Poirot leaned forward. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, voice lowered, "you have each presented your versions of the evening, yet notable inconsistencies remain. Good heavens, are we not all too refined to ignore such trifles?" He stood, drawing the satchel toward him. "I propose after luncheon a brief examination of your personal effects," your coats, gloves, handbags, even the monogrammed handkerchiefs. We shall see whether any bear traces of blood or gunpowder, and whether the missing stitch was restored by a thread matching one of these. A wave of apprehension passed through the assembled guests. Miss Phillips paled. Colonel Ashton straightened with an almost imperceptible jerk. Mr. Crowley's composure flickered, and Mrs. Barrington rose, placing a gloved hand over her heart. Poirot's final words, delivered with gentle firmness, brought the chapter to its close. In this game of shadows and tiny threads, nothing is too small to escape my notice. The tapestry may hide its secret, but we shall unearth the truth behind its stitches, and behind the faces that stand before me. And so the suspects dispersed once more, the manor's halls echoing with their anxious footsteps. The stage was set, the players assembled, and Poirot's investigation had truly begun. Chapter 4. Poirot takes control. The mahogany door of the library swung open with a soft click, admitting Inspector Leclerc of Scotland Yard and his uniformed constable. They paused in the doorway, surveying the assembled group. Lady Danvers poised at the head of the table, her composure restored by a stiff glass of brandy. The guests flanked her, faces lined with fatigue and apprehension. And at the focal point, Hercule Poirot, who rose from his seat with an elegant motion, his little grey cells already whirring into action. "Inspector," Poirot greeted him, inclining his head. His voice was warm, yet unwavering. "Welcome to Danvers Manor. I trust your journey was uneventful?" Leclerc offered a curt nod. "I should hope so, Monsieur Poirot. We received your telegram and departed as swiftly as possible." He gestured to his constable. "This is Constable Davies." Poirot allowed the young officer a moment's courtesy nod before turning to the company. "Mesdames et messieurs, the official inquiry has arrived. From this point forward, you must answer Inspector Leclerc's questions as well as mine. But permit me, Inspector, to provide you with my preliminary observations." Leclerc, though accustomed to commanding a room, deferred to Poirot's request. "By all means." Poirot gestured toward the long table, now cleared of luncheon plates. He retrieved from his leather satchel a small cloth-wrapped bundle and set it before him. "I have taken the liberty of inspecting personal effects of the household and guests, gloves, handkerchiefs, and coats. My aim was to ascertain whether any bore traces of blood, gunpowder, or matching thread to that of the tapestry's lower border." Carefully, he unwrapped the bundle to display 3 pairs of gloves and 2 handkerchiefs, each marked with discreet monograms. He held up a velvet glove embroidered with the initials G.P. This glove, belonging to Miss Genevieve Phillips, revealed minute specks of blood along the cuff seam. He paused, allowing the implication to settle. Yet, curiously, no gunpowder residue. He set the glove down and picked up a crisp ivory handkerchief monogrammed T.C. Mr. Crowley's handkerchief displays a fine dusting of gunpowder, a residue I detected on the letter opener itself. Finally, he produced a pair of leather gloves without any markings. These were found in Colonel Ashton's billiard room. They too bear no blood, but a faint smear of olive-green paint, matching the hue of the garden sheds. Miss Phillips's cheeks paled, Colonel Ashton's brow furrowed. Mr. Crowley adjusted his collar with sudden stiffness. Mrs. Barrington remained impassive, her hand resting calmly upon her unmarked gloves. Poirot replaced the items and addressed Inspector Leclerc. "I believe these findings merit your attention. They suggest that at least 2 persons handled the murder weapon or passed by the crime scene immediately afterward. The presence of paint smears on the colonel's gloves implies a hurried journey through the estate grounds, perhaps to dispose of evidence. Leclerc arched an eyebrow. You've done quite a thorough preliminary examination, Monsieur Poirot. Madame, Poirot corrected, motioning to Lady Danvers, has confirmed that the garden sheds stored the estate's maintenance equipment, including paint and tools. The Colonel's explanation for his presence in that area last night will be instructive. A hush fell. Colonel Ashton cleared his throat. I took a moment to inspect the East Wing's newly painted exterior under the moonlight. Sir Reginald wished to gauge the drying progress. I did not realize. His voice trailed off under Poirot's steady gaze. Poirot inclined his head. Thank you, Colonel. We shall discuss this further in due course. He then turned to Miss Phillips. Your glove's blood stains are puzzling, for you maintain you entered the gallery only to admire the tapestry. Yet if you handled the letter opener, or touched the body afterward, the traces would remain. Miss Phillips swallowed. I did approach the gallery after discovering my uncle's body. I thought to close the letter opener to lessen its horror. She bowed her head. I did not wish to disturb the scene further. Poirot's lips curved in a mild, understanding smile. An understandable impulse. Yet one must remember that the scene must be preserved in its original state until the proper authorities arrive. Turning to Mr. Crowley, Poirot continued, And you, sir, with gunpowder on your handkerchief, how do you account for that? Mr. Crowley's composure wavered for a moment before he recovered. I carry shell casings as mementos of my time in the army, he said stiffly. One or two may have lodged in my pocket. It was purely incidental. Poirot regarded him thoughtfully. Perhaps. But one would think that such a keepsake would be cleaned thoroughly before being brought to a refined gathering. He allowed the statement to hang in the air. Finally, he addressed Mrs. Barrington. Madame, your glove and handkerchief bear no marks whatsoever. Yet you passed through the gallery late in the evening, you say? Mrs. Barrington inclined her head. Merely to retrieve my shawl, which I had hung there earlier. I remained by the door and did not approach the tapestry. Poirot nodded, his expression inscrutable. Very well, your statement will be noted. He paused, folding his hands atop the table. Inspector, I recommend securing the garden sheds and examining any tools that may have been used to mend the tapestry. The sudden repair suggests either a hurried cover-up or the work of another party entirely, someone who desired to mask the original tampering. Leclerc made a quick note. Understood. I shall dispatch a constable to search the sheds at once. Poirot rose and swept his gaze across the room. Mesdames et messieurs, today's revelations are but the first threads of a much larger tapestry. We have evidence of blood, gunpowder, and paint, each linking a different suspect to the crime. And yet no single piece provides the complete picture. He walked toward the hearth, where the morning's papers lay neglected. Selecting the local Wiltshire Gazette, he examined the obituary column. Here, he murmured, tracing his finger down the list of recent deaths. A curious entry. The passing of Sir Reginald's brother, Lord Julian Danvers, 6 months ago. Official cause, heart failure, yet I note a mention of mysterious bruising. He closed the paper. I believe the roots of tonight's tragedy may reach back further than we suppose. Inspector Leclerc looked up, intrigued. You think this murder connects to the late Lord Julian? Possibly, Poirot replied. Human nature being what it is, old grievances are seldom buried with the dead. But for now, we must focus on the here and now. He turned to me. Hastings, Fetch the tapestry from the gallery. I wish to examine the newly restored stitch under proper lighting. As I hurried to obey, Poirot addressed the assembled guests one final time. I shall conduct private interviews with each of you again, this time with the evidence in hand. Be prepared to speak frankly. The truth waits patiently beneath layers of deception, and it is my task to expose it. With a nod to Inspector Leclerc and a tranquil smile to Lady Danvers, Poirot set about orchestrating the next phase of his inquiry. The guests exchanged uneasy glances as I returned with the tapestry draped across a pair of easels, its embroidered scenes now the stage for Poirot's continued deductions. The game, it was abundantly clear, had advanced to a new and deepening level of complexity. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. That afternoon, the library hummed with a quiet tension. The tapestry, draped across two easels, stood sentinel at the far end of the room. Sunlight filtered through heavy draperies, casting shifting patterns on the Persian carpet. At Poirot's request, the suspects had assembled once more, this time in pairs, for individual interviews. I took my station behind him, notebook at the ready, eager to record every nuance. Poirot began with Miss Genevieve Phillips. She entered the room with hesitant steps, her lilac gown brushing the rug. He gestured to a pair of chairs by the window. "Miss Phillips," Poirot said, voice soft yet commanding. "You told me earlier that you repaired the letter opener's blade only to close it and spare your aunt further distress. Pray tell, why did you handle the weapon at all?" Miss Phillips placed gloved hands in her lap. Her pale lips trembled slightly. I could not bear to see it lying open, monsieur. It seemed a small mercy to conceal its threat. I meant no harm." She glanced at the tapestry. "Uncle Reginald was always so particular. I thought he would have wished it thus." Poirot's grey eyes remained fixed. "Yet your glove bore his blood. If you had forgotten to remove your glove before touching the handle, why not mention it sooner?" She swallowed. I was frightened, ashamed. I thought to protect Aunt, to protect the memory of my uncle. Her voice cracked. "Forgive me, monsieur." Poirot inclined his head. "Your motive was compassion, yet one must be aware that compassion can obscure facts." He paused, watching her breathe deeply. "Thank you, Miss Phillips. You may go." She rose, shoulders hunched, and left with a soft curtsy. Next came Colonel Ashton. He strode in with military precision, settling into a chair Poirot indicated near the hearth. "Colonel," Poirot began, "you tell us you ventured into the estate grounds to inspect the newly painted east wing. Pray, when exactly did you conduct this nocturnal survey?" The colonel's posture stiffened. "Shortly after the gallery unveiling, perhaps 20 minutes later. Sir Reginald requested my opinion on the drying coat." Poirot tapped his cane on the floor. "Yet your gloves bore fresh paint, matching that on the sheds. Would you have applied the paint yourself, or merely brushed against wet surfaces?" "As I said," the colonel replied tightly, "I leaned against a newly painted pillar. I did not realize it was still damp. I washed the gloves afterward." He flexed his hands. "They were thoroughly laundered before morning, I assure you." "Indeed," Poirot murmured. He leaned forward. "Tell me, Colonel, did you pass through the gallery en route to the sheds?" "At a distance," Ashton admitted. "I saw the tapestries unveiling but did not pause. My task lay outside." His gaze flicked to the tapestry. "I had no interest in that tapestry, monsieur." Poirot made a note. "Very well. You may go." Colonel Ashton stood, his jaw set, and exited. Mrs. Adelaide Barrington was the third. She entered with composed grace, though her cheeks bore a faint rose flush. "Madame," Poirot said, indicating the chairs before the fireplace, "you passed the gallery door to retrieve your shawl. Did you approach the tapestry itself?" She sank into the armchair. "No, monsieur. I paused just inside the gallery, perhaps 5 paces from the tapestry. I held my shawl and retreated." She folded her unmarked gloves in her lap. "I left before the tapestry was formally unveiled, then returned to my rooms." Poirot's gaze was gentle. "You claim no contact with the tapestry, yet someone repaired its hem without our knowledge. Do you know who could possess both the skill to mend needlework and the motive to target the tapestry?" Mrs. Barrington considered the question. "Certainly not I. But Aunt spoke of your admiration for fine needlework, monsieur. Perhaps others share that enthusiasm." Poirot smiled slightly. "An astute deflection, madame. Yet I shall consider your words." He closed his notebook. "You may go." Finally, Mr. Theodore Crowley entered, posture aloof. He settled into the final pair of chairs. "Mr. Crowley," Poirot began, "your handkerchief bears gunpowder residue. You claim it originates from souvenir shell casings. Yet the residue we found on the letter opener blade is fresh. Explain this coincidence." Mr. Crowley tapped the monogrammed handkerchief with a gauntlet fingertip. "I carry shell fragments as reminders of my service. I may have inadvertently touched the casing before retrieving my handkerchief." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "And you happened to pass through the gallery, now adorned with gunpowder on the blade, shortly after the murder?" His tone was courteous, but probing. "I was studying the tapestry's design," Crowley replied. "Photography was inconvenient in the dim light. I removed my gloves to steady my grip." He leaned back. "There is no more to it." Poirot nodded slowly. "One final question. Did you observe anyone repairing the tapestry's hem during the night?" Mr. Crowley's pale face remained impassive. "No, I did not. I depart." He bowed and left the room, leaving only Poirot and me. Once the interviews concluded, Poirot stood and stretched. "Mes amis," he announced, "we have the benefit of initial statements. Each suspect claimed a harmless purpose: concealment out of pity, inspection of paint, retrieval of a shawl, admiration of design. Yet each statement masks a deeper motive or opportunity." I jotted down his observations: blood on gloves, paint on gloves, absence of marks, gunpowder on handkerchief. Poirot spoke calmly, but with an intensity that made my pen fly across the page. "We must now turn our attention to the tapestry itself," he said. "The missing stitch, despite its brief absence, was restored with thread of near-identical hue. I shall analyze the fabric under magnification. Hastings, assist me in retrieving my microscope." As I left to fetch the instrument from Poirot's bedroom, he called after me. "And Hastings, see that the suspects remain in their rooms. No one approaches the tapestry until I deem it appropriate." Moments later, I returned with the small brass microscope. Poirot illuminated the hem with a lamp and placed the fabric beneath the lens. He peered through, murmuring, "Notice the slight difference in twist and tension here. Ah, yes. A finer spun thread, likely from a handkerchief or glove lining, not from the tapestry's original warp." I bent closer. Could the culprit have used material from their own gloves? Poirot nodded. "Precisely, Hastings. Now consider. Miss Phillips's gloves showed blood, but no residue. Colonel Ashton's showed paint, but no blood. Mr. Crowley's held residue, but no paint or blood. Mrs. Barrington's bore no marks at all. Yet someone had access to thread that matched neither of their personal materials exactly. I paused. Then whose thread was used? Poirot's eyes gleamed. That, mon ami, is a mystery yet to be solved. But when next we question the suspects, we shall present these findings and note their reactions. For in those fleeting expressions lies the key to unraveling their hidden motivations. He straightened and smiled politely. Now, Hastings, let us prepare for Section 6, the first false lead. The threads of this case are growing ever more tangled. With that, he swept the microscope aside and beckoned me to follow him from the library, leaving the tapestry's quietly humming secrets behind. Chapter 6. The first false lead. Late that afternoon, a tremor of excitement rippled through Danvers Manor as Inspector Leclerc's constable returned from the garden sheds, clutching a small leather satchel. In the library, Poirot stood by the window, hands folded behind his back, while the remaining guests, Miss Phillips, Colonel Ashton, Mr. Crowley, and Mrs. Barrington, paced nervously in anticipation. I hovered near the door, ready to observe their reactions. Inspector Leclerc entered, nodding to Poirot. Monsieur Poirot, we have searched the sheds. We found this satchel hidden beneath a workbench. He handed it to Poirot, who untied the leather cord with deliberate care. Inside lay a length of silver thread, identical in color to the tapestry's border, along with a small pair of sharp embroidery scissors. The scissors' blades were tarnished and a few faded flecks of red stained their handles. Poirot lifted the scissors gingerly and held them before the assembly. Mesdames et messieurs, he announced, we have here the very implements used to remove, and perhaps replace, the tapestry stitch. Notice the similarity between the thread in this satchel and that which now restores the tapestry's lower border. He unfurled the thread between his fingers, allowing the light to catch its subtle sheen. Furthermore, the scissors bear a fleck of blood, clearly the same hue as that found on Miss Phillips's glove, and specks of paint matching Colonel Ashton's gloves. A collective gasp escaped the group. Miss Phillips's hand flew to her throat, Colonel Ashton's jaw tightened, Mr. Crowley's composure seemed to waver, and Mrs. Barrington closed her eyes for a heartbeat before regaining her calm. Poirot continued. This satchel was hidden where only those familiar with the estate's workings would know, behind the workbench in the garden shed. One must have paused there between the gallery and the outdoors to conceal these tools. Leclerc interjected, Do any of you recognize this satchel or its contents? His gaze swept over the guests. Miss Phillips shook her head, voice trembling. It is not mine. She glanced at Mrs. Barrington for support, but the older woman's expression remained placid. Colonel Ashton cleared his throat. I saw no one with such a satchel. It is unfamiliar to me. Mr. Crowley's lips pursed. Nor to me. I seldom enter the sheds except to admire the rose trellises beyond. Mrs. Barrington folded her hands. I have never handled embroidery scissors in my life. Poirot tapped the satchel with his cane. Curious, is it not? A tool that implicates two suspects, yet denied by all four. I propose we examine each person's room and personal effects for a matching satchel or scissors. He glanced at the inspector. May I? Leclerc nodded. By all means. Two constables departed to conduct the search. The guests, visibly unsettled, exchanged wary glances. Miss Phillips pressed her gloved hand to her wrist, as if feeling for a hidden bruise. Colonel Ashton walked toward a bookshelf, fingering the spines of books absent-mindedly. Mr. Crowley circled the table, eyes downcast. Only Mrs. Barrington remained seated, composed but inscrutable. Moments later, the constables returned empty-handed. Poirot raised an eyebrow. No satchel, no scissors, yet these items existed within the garden sheds only hours ago, and were placed there by our murderer, or by someone wishing to mislead us. He held up the scissors again. Let us consider the possibilities. If the murderer planted these tools to implicate multiple parties, they wished to sow confusion. But confusion for what purpose? To divert attention from themselves, or to mask another crime? My mind raced. Could the murderer have borrowed the satchel from the gardener or a servant, then returned it? I asked. Poirot's moustaches quivered. An astute notion, Hastings. Yet the garden staff were attending the feast in the kitchen until the gardener was called away by the scream. He would not have had time to hide these tools. He considered the group. Perhaps we should question the staff next. But first I wish to explore one further avenue. He placed the scissors gently upon the table and moved toward the hearth. There the morning's newspapers lay, still unopened since his earlier reading. He picked up the Wiltshire Gazette once more and flipped through the pages until he found the obituary of Lord Julian Danvers. Recall that I mentioned bruising on Lord Julian at the time of his death, Poirot said, voice lowered. The report hinted at a struggle. Suppose someone believed that the tapestry contained a clue to Lord Julian's demise. The missing stitch might conceal a letter or symbol pointing to foul play. The murderer may have sought the clue, removed it, then returned it hurriedly when it proved obscure. Miss Phillips's eyes widened. Uncle Julian, he never spoke of anything like that. Colonel Ashton frowned. I recall Sir Reginald mentioning a hidden cipher in the tapestry, something Lord Julian left behind for a future generation. He looked at Poirot with new interest. Could that be true? Poirot nodded slowly. Possibly. But whether the cipher exists or not, someone believed enough to search for it. Just then, one of the constables re-entered, ushering in the gardener, Mr. Bennet, a gaunt man in mud-stained boots. The inspector stepped forward to question him, but Poirot held up a hand. Allow me, Inspector. Poirot studied Mr. Bennet's lined face. Good evening, Mr. Bennet. You were in the shed before the body was discovered? The gardener's lips quivered. Yes, fetching spare pots and soil. I heard the scream and came to see what was amiss. I swear I saw no one hide anything. He looked at the scissors on the table. Those don't belong to me. I use larger tools, spades, and pruning shears. Poirot's gaze was compassionate. Of course. But did you hear footsteps or voices in the shed corridor after the scream? Mr. Bennet scrunched his brow. Only Lady Danvers's maid, Miss Montague. She hurried past, crying out for water. She had a small pouch, something like this satchel, woven leather. She dropped it in the hallway by accident, then left. A hush fell. Inspector Leclerc strode to the librarian's desk and opened a drawer, retrieving a small woven pouch identical to the satchel, but empty. He placed it beside the scissors. Poirot's eyes shone. There, mes amis, a satchel belonging to the maid, Miss Montague. She panicked and dropped it. The murderer must have taken her pouch to conceal his own tools, then hidden them in the shed to avoid detection, knowing the gardener would claim innocence. Miss Phillips's face went pale. But Miss Montague, she is loyal. Why involve her? Poirot pressed his finger to his lips. That is yet another thread to follow. But, he turned to the inspector. Inspector Leclerc, summon Miss Montague and have her confession taken. Meanwhile, we must determine who used her pouch and why they wished it to be identified as another's. As the constable hurried off, Poirot addressed the remaining guests. You see, the path to truth is seldom straight. We have been led into the garden sheds only to discover an intentional misdirection. The first false lead, mesdames et messieurs, has served its purpose, to draw our attention from the cipher, the secret of Lord Julian, and the true motive. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. Now, allow us to return to the tapestry, for I believe the real clue lies not in what was taken, but in what was left behind. And with that, Poirot strode toward the gallery, the assembled guests trailing in uneasy procession, unaware of how profoundly the game had shifted. Chapter 7. The Psychological Game. The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of the gallery, illuminating the centuries-old tapestry in streaks of amber. Poirot stood before the embroidered scene, a courtly banquet interrupted by a masked figure, and allowed the guests to gather around him. The room's hush was tangible, as though every breath might disturb an unseen pattern woven into the fabric. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, hands clasped behind his back, I have summoned you here not merely to admire artistry, but to observe each other. Let us engage in a small demonstration of psychology. He turned to Miss Phillips. Mademoiselle, would you be so kind as to stand beside me? Genevieve Phillips stepped forward, pale in her lilac gown. Poirot motioned for Colonel Ashton to join them on the opposite side, then beckoned Mr. Crowley and Mrs. Barrington to take places at the corners. A courtly banquet, Poirot said, waving his cane toward the tapestry. One expects civility, yet the masked intruder, dangerous, unseen, lurks among the guests. This image, I believe, is not without purpose. Observe how you feel. He tilted his head. Miss Phillips, do you feel threatened? She inhaled sharply. I feel uneasy, monsieur. That figure seems ready to strike. Precisely, Poirot replied. And you, Colonel? The retired officer shifted his weight. Apprehensive, yes, but I would defend the banquet, should the need arise. Poirot's green gaze swept to Mr. Crowley. And you, sir? Mr. Crowley's eyes narrowed. I see opportunity. The banquet's wealth, the secrets of its host, ripe for exploitation. Poirot turned to Mrs. Barrington. Madame? She regarded him serenely. I see sorrow. The masked guest mourns the host in silence. There is grief beneath that visage. Poirot smiled as though savouring a fine wine. 4 interpretations, 4 perspectives, yet only one matches the tapestry's hidden meaning. He tapped the fabric's fringe. Much like this tapestry, the truth of Sir Reginald's death is concealed beneath layers. You, Miss Phillips, interpret danger because you fear guilt. You, Colonel, see defence because you desire to protect your reputation. You, Mr. Crowley, see opportunity because business is your compass. And you, Mrs. Barrington, perceive grief because you mourn without being suspected. His words hung in the air, each guest absorbing their own reflection. Poirot stepped back. Now, let us test another subtle influence. He reached into his coat pocket and produced 4 identical porcelain buttons, simple, unadorned. He placed them on a small velvet cloth on a lectern. I have here buttons from each of your coats. I shall ask a question, and the one whose button I touch will answer. A simple game of chance, but one that often reveals hidden selves. He closed his eyes, pursing his lips in thought. The guests watched him intently. He pretended to be drawn to one button, then another. Finally, he tapped the button belonging to Colonel Ashton. Colonel, Poirot intoned, had you any prior quarrel with Sir Reginald over money or land rights? The Colonel suppressed a flicker of annoyance. None that I would name. We had disagreements over renovations, but no quarrel. Poirot lifted the button and gazed at it. Perhaps. He set it aside and touched Mrs. Barrington's button. Madame, did you ever confide in Sir Reginald a secret you now wish remained buried? Mrs. Barrington's serene mask slipped for a fraction of a second, enough for Poirot to note. I shared confidences, yes, she admitted softly, but secrets destined never to harm. Poirot nodded, placing her button aside, then touched Miss Phillips's. Mademoiselle, did you feel resentment at Sir Reginald's guardianship, his control over your inheritance? Geneviève hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. Perhaps. Resentment is a strong word. I felt constrained. Finally, Poirot tapped Mr. Crowley's button. Sir, have you ever suspected Sir Reginald of cheating you in your business ventures? Crowley's face darkened. There were moments I questioned his accounting. Poirot surveyed the screen of buttons, now absent, one from each. 4 admissions, varying degrees of truth and falsehood. The heart reveals itself, mes amis, not through facts alone, but through reactions. He folded his hands. Now, allow me to pose one final question, aloud, to all. Which of you would stand to gain most from the disappearance of Lord Julian's cipher? Silence fell, broken only by the tick of a distant grandfather clock. Miss Phillips looked toward her late uncle's portrait on the wall. Colonel Ashton's jaw clenched. Mr. Crowley's gaze flicked to the floor. Mrs. Barrington's eyes glistened with something indiscernible. Poirot walked slowly around them. Consider your answers carefully. You are not merely suspects, but players in a grand drama, one that tests your loyalties, your fears, and your ambitions. He paused beside Colonel Ashton. Colonel, you would secure your financial future by preventing any revelation that might devalue the Danvers Mills. He stepped to Crowley. Mr. Crowley, you would prevent the cipher from exposing a clandestine partnership, one that could destroy your dealings. He turned to Miss Phillips. You would safeguard your inheritance, ensuring no hint of impropriety by Lord Julian undermines your claim. And finally, he faced Mrs. Barrington. Madame, you would protect a legacy of confidences, burying any scandal that could tarnish a lifelong friendship. Each guest offered a subtle shift, a breath caught, a tightening of shoulders. Poirot straightened, his expression calm. My friends, this is the psychological game. It reveals the desires hidden within each heart. Yet desire alone does not equate to guilt. Desire must be matched with opportunity and action. He raised a slender finger. Tomorrow at dawn, I shall review the cipher's whereabouts, if cipher it be. Tonight, I advise you to consider your own truths, for half-truths will not stand before the full light of reason. With that, Poirot nodded to Inspector Leclerc, who dismissed the gathering. As the guests departed, some lingering to cast wary glances at one another, Poirot and I remained alone before the tapestry. Mon ami, Poirot said quietly, we have seen their true colours. Now let us prepare to discover whether they acted upon their desires, or whether an entirely different motive drives our murderer. I closed my notebook, heart pounding at the revelations to come. The psychological game was in motion, and Poirot's little grey cells had drawn us closer to the hidden heart of the mystery. Chapter 8. A secondary mystery. The following morning dawned grey and misty over Danvers Manor, the air thick with moisture that clung to pane and pain like spectral veils. Over breakfast in the sunroom, an ornate conservatory adjoining the library, the remaining guests gathered, each subdued by the events of the previous day. The long breakfast table was laid with delicate china and steaming pots of tea. Wild flowers, rescued from the conservatory's blooms, scented the air. Yet beneath the genteel veneer lay tension, a current of unspoken fear. Poirot sat between Inspector Leclerc and me, his posture immaculate, his moustaches immaculately waxed. Across from him, Colonel Ashton poured cream into his cup in deliberate, impatient strokes. Miss Genevieve Phillips hovered near the sugar bowl, her pale fingers twisting her napkin. Mr. Theodore Crowley, nibbling a scone, his gaze restless. And Mrs. Adelaide Barrington sipped her tea with a serene expression that belied her quicksilver eyes. "Mes amis," Poirot began softly. "Before we continue with our inquiries, I wish to address a matter most troubling." He raised his teacup, its porcelain rim lightly flecked with the pale green of jasmine tea. "This morning, I noticed something amiss in my own cup." He placed the cup on its saucer and drew it closer to the morning light, peering into the liquid. A faint, oily sheen, visible only at a certain angle, and a metallic aftertaste. Miss Phillips stiffened. "Monsieur, do you suspect poison?" Her voice barely formed the word. Poirot nodded gravely. "An attempted poisoning. Fortunately, the dose was insufficient to prove lethal, yet the intent is clear." He turned to Inspector Leclerc. "I request that you secure this tea service for analysis." The inspector and his constable exchanged glances, then wrapped the cup in cloth and carried it away. A hush fell. Colonel Ashton set his spoon aside with a clink. "Attempted poisoning," he echoed. "Whom did you suspect first, monsieur?" Poirot's grey eyes swept the table. "I suspect the intention was to strike the next most vulnerable. Miss Phillips, perhaps, should she have taken tea after me, or Lady Danvers if she joined us here." He tapped his fingers on the table. The poison was mixed into the teapot. Note the lack of residue in the individual cups, but its presence in the communal brew. Mrs. Barrington's face paled slightly. "I did pour from the teapot to my cup after you, monsieur, yet I feel none the worse for it." Poirot inclined his head. "A small dose, madame, most likely intended as a warning or a test, but consider, the tea table accessed only by those permitted this room. A poisoner must have been present, with access to the kitchen or the serving tray, after last night's dinner." Mr. Crowley narrowed his eyes. "The kitchen staff are to be questioned, surely. They prepare and serve the tea." "Indeed," Poirot replied, "but I prefer first to observe our suspect's reactions." He leaned back, folding one leg over the other. "Miss Phillips, tell me, did you notice anything unusual in the conservatory before breakfast?" Miss Phillips swallowed. "Only that the sugar bowl appeared misplaced, on the side nearest Colonel Ashton rather than beside my place setting." She wrung her hands. "I thought only of my uncle's death, not of anything more sinister." Colonel Ashton's lips thinned. "I did not move your sugar bowl, mademoiselle. It shifted by the time I reached for sugar," she said. "Perhaps a servant, but none entered after the table was set." Poirot nodded. "An instructive detail. And you, Colonel, did you notice any irregularity in last night's dinner service? Odd dishes, missing plates, strange behavior from the staff?" The Colonel considered. "Only that Mrs. Barrington requested extra parsley for her entree, and I recall the footman returning twice to the kitchen with her plate." Mrs. Barrington smiled faintly. "I prefer fresh garnish, nothing more." "But the footman's second journey," Poirot pressed, "coincided with the silent interval between soup and fish course, enough time to slip something into the teapot." He turned to Mr. Crowley. "And you, did you request any alteration last night?" Mr. Crowley's brow creased. "No, I did not. I had the guest special, as served to all. Poirot steepled his fingers. Then our poisoner lies either among us or among those with access to the kitchen. He addressed Inspector Leclerc. Question the servants, especially the footman who attended table, and the cook who prepared the broth. Leclerc nodded briskly. At once, monsieur. As the inspector and constable departed, Poirot turned back to the table. In the meantime, I shall continue my observations here. He leaned toward Miss Phillips. Mademoiselle, you seem most agitated. Is it solely grief, or does fear stalk your thoughts? She trembled. I fear that someone wishes to silence me, perhaps to prevent me from revealing what I discovered in the tapestry's hem. Poirot arched an eyebrow. And what, exactly, did you discover? His tone was mild but insistent. Genevieve hesitated. Only a small slip of parchment hidden beneath the stitching. I did not read it, only glimpsed letters, perhaps initials, LJD. And then the hem had been re-sewn before I could show it to anyone. His moustaches twitched. LJD, Lord Julian Danvers, a connection to his death. He rose, smoothing his waistcoat. Ladies and gentlemen, let us adjourn to the gallery. If a secondary crime has been committed here, attempted poisoning, there may yet be direct evidence near the tapestry itself. We filed into the gallery, our footsteps soft on the Persian runners. The tapestry hung between the tall casements, its embroidered banquet scene now shadowed by the morning's revelations. Sunlight filtered through the windows, illuminating the masked figure in the woven court. Poirot approached the lower border. Observe, he said, kneeling to examine the hem. The line of stitching conceals the parchment that Miss Phillips described. But note the disturbance here. He pointed to a slight bulge. And here, a small fray that suggests someone cut around the parchment to extract it. He slid his gloved finger along the seam. We have evidence of 2 tamperings, one to remove the cipher slip, and now the attempted poisoning to silence further probing. The murderer grows bolder. Colonel Ashton peered over Poirot's shoulder. Could the poisoning be linked to the cipher's removal? A diversion to shift suspicion? It is possible, Poirot agreed. Alternatively, the poison may have tested our resolve, gauging how swiftly we respond before the real culprit strikes again. Mrs. Barrington touched the tapestry gently. Surely no one could commit both crimes without being seen. Poirot looked up, his eyes sharp. Ah, but the mask of ceremony and the cloak of service can conceal many acts. The true question is who possessed the proximity and the motive, both last night and this morning. He rose, dusting his knees. I shall question the cook and the footman, then return for further inquiries. Meanwhile, remain where you are, under Lady Danvers's protection. No one should leave this wing. As Inspector Leclerc and his constable hurried away, Poirot turned to me. Mon ami, collect my writings and meet me in the study within the hour. I wish to compare notes on the tapestry's cipher and the dagger's removal. These secondary events have entwined our suspects more tightly in the web of deception. I nodded, watching the guests stand in uneasy silence by the tapestry. Each face reflected the dawn's uncertainty, fear, guilt, determination, sorrow. The secondary mystery had arrived, an attempted poisoning that threatened not only lives, but the fragile thread of truth. And as we departed the gallery, I felt the weight of Poirot's words. The tapestry's secret, once hidden in plain sight, now dangled at the edge of discovery. Tomorrow's revelations promised to unravel yet another layer of intrigue. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. The study was hushed as I entered. Poirot seated behind his mahogany desk, surrounded by scattered papers, notebooks, and the tintype photographs he had acquired from Sir Reginald's private collection. He looked up with that inscrutable smile, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Ah, Hastings," he greeted, gesturing to a high-backed leather chair. "Thank you for joining me. We have much to discuss." I settled in and placed my notebook on the side table. The cipher slip, the poisoned tea, the hidden scissors. Quite the tangle. Poirot nodded, tapping a photograph with his cane. "Indeed. But before we return to the tapestry, I wish to explore certain relationships, hidden connections among our suspects that may explain their motivations." He leaned forward, drawing out a thin brass magnifying glass. "Let us begin with Miss Genevieve Phillips. You noted her distress when I mentioned Lord Julian's cipher, yes?" I recalled her pale face. She seemed frightened, as though she had something to conceal beyond mere concern for inheritance. Poirot's moustaches quivered. "Precisely. I have here letters from Sir Reginald to his niece, private missives in which he cautioned her against prying into certain family secrets. One letter, dated 6 months ago, references a reckless venture involving Colonel Ashton and the Danvers textile mills. He passed me a typed transcription. "My dearest Genevieve, you must not meddle in matters of business that are not your concern. Colonel Ashton values his investments, but there are forces at work that could ruin both him and the family name. Trust that I attend to these affairs. Yours, Reginald." I frowned. So Sir Reginald suspected financial dealings between Ashton and Phillips. Poirot tapped the paper. More than suspected, he instructed her not to interfere. Yet she arrived at the manor clutching a ledger of her own making, detailing shares she claimed had been misappropriated. A hidden partnership, perhaps, between her and the Colonel. I leaned back, surprised. She never mentioned any alliance with Colonel Ashton. "Because it was secret," Poirot said, "and she feared her uncle's disapproval. Now consider Mr. Crowley. I have here an invoice for a large shipment of textile machinery co-signed by Sir Reginald and Theodore Crowley. Yet recent bank statements reveal that payments ceased 3 months ago, around the time Lord Julian died." He slid a bank statement toward me. Coincidence? I think not. Crowley's gunpowder residue suggests familiarity with weaponry, and, perhaps, smuggled transactions. The suspension of payments could have stemmed from a dispute over ownership of the cipher, which Julian allegedly possessed. I tapped the paper. So Crowley might have sought to retrieve the cipher to secure his investments, or to silence Lord Julian's claims. "Exactly," Poirot affirmed. "And then there is Mrs. Barrington." He produced a leather-bound journal. This belonged to her late husband, Lord Pembroke, who died in obscure circumstances 4 years ago. She has never shared its contents, until now. He opened the journal, revealing entries in a neat, slanted hand. "Here," he said, pointing, "a notation. Reginald will not forgive Julian's indiscretion, nor mine." Further down, "I fear wounds deeper than grief." I frowned. Wounds? Could be metaphorical, yet the implication is clear. Mrs. Barrington had cause to resent both Danvers brothers. Poirot nodded gravely. And yet she remained a trusted confidant, until we consider her presence near the gallery late at night and her serene composure this morning, despite the poisoning attempt. He closed the journal. Thus we see a network of shared interests and old grievances, Phillips and Ashton over inheritance and investments, Crowley and Danvers over the textile mills, Barrington and both brothers over personal betrayals. Each connection suggests motive. I rose to pace the room, But overlapping motives alone cannot pinpoint our murderer. We must tie opportunity to intent. Poirot waved his hand, summoning me back to the desk. Indeed. Let us plot these connections. He drew a rough diagram on a sheet of paper. Nodes for each suspect linked to Lord Julian and Sir Reginald, annotated with shared secrets. Here, the ledger linking Phillips and Ashton. Here, the invoices linking Crowley and Reginald. And here, the journal linking Barrington to both brothers. This tapestry's cipher, and its missing slip, must illuminate which connection drove the killer to action. He paused, running a finger along the edge of a photograph showing the 4 suspects standing together at last night's banquet. Observe their group photograph. Note how Genevieve stands nearest Ashton, while Crowley stands beside Mrs. Barrington. Alliances, visible even in a single frame. I peered at the image. Yes, Phillips and Ashton lean slightly toward each other, as if conspiratorial. And Crowley's gaze is fixed on Barrington, though they maintain polite distance. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Body language, yet another hidden connection. Now I propose we observe their interactions at dinner this evening. I shall invite them to dine in Sir Reginald's private dining room. Closer quarters, more opportunities to reveal their alliances. I nodded. And what of the servants' testimonies about Miss Montague's satchel? Inspector Leclerc will question the maid, Poirot replied. Should she confirm that the satchel was hers, we know our murderer sought to misdirect us toward the staff. That tells us desperation and premeditation. He rose, smoothing his waistcoat. Come, Hastings. We shall review the cipher's reconstruction while the meal is prepared. Every connection must be examined in light of the tapestry's hidden message. As we left the study, I reflected on the intricate web Poirot had unveiled. Each suspect was bound to the deceased brothers by motive and secrecy, yet only one thread would lead to the killer. The tapestry's cipher slip, bearing the initials LJD, would reveal whose destiny it sealed and whose fate it sealed last night. In the corridor, I paused. Poirot, I said, with so many hidden connections, how will you discern the singular thread that matters? He turned, placing a gloved hand on my shoulder. Patience, mon ami. The smallest gesture, a glance, a hesitation, will guide us. The tapestry awaits, and soon its cipher will speak. With that, we proceeded to the gallery, the echoes of our steps blending with the silent anticipation of the manor itself. The next act of this grand drama was about to unfold. Chapter 10. Poirot's Secret Clue. The private dining room of Danvers Manor exuded an intimate air that evening. A low oak table, softly lit by candelabra, surrounded by high-backed chairs upholstered in scarlet velvet. Silver-chased plates glinted under the warm glow, and the scent of roast venison mingled with clove-studded apples. Poirot had summoned the remaining suspects, Miss Phillips, Colonel Ashton, Mr. Crowley, and Mrs. Barrington, to dine here, under the pretense of discussing Sir Reginald's estate matters. Yet I could see the tension etched on each face as they took their places. Poirot stood at the head of the table, his posture immaculate, his little grey cells already at work. Mes amis, he began, voice gentle. Tonight we dine in closer quarters. It is my hope that comfort may coax candour. He gestured for the footman to serve the first course, parsnip soup with a swirl of truffle oil. As the guests lifted their spoons, Poirot whispered to me, Observe their hands, how they clasp the bowls, how they place their napkins. Each gesture betrays inner tumult. I noted Miss Phillips's trembling fingers, Colonel Ashton's rigid grip, Crowley's purposeful hold, and Barrington's perfectly poised elegance. When the soup plates were cleared, Poirot raised his fork in a poised salute. "Allow me, Hastings, to retrieve an item from my study." He departed, leaving the table in awkward silence. The others exchanged glances. Colonel Ashton's eyes flicked to the door as though pondering escape. Moments later, Poirot returned, carrying a slender ebony case. He placed it before me. "Hastings, assist me." He opened the case to reveal a polished magnifying glass and a fine sable brush. "I have reason to believe the tapestry conceals one more clue, hidden not in its stitches, but upon its surface. We shall examine it here, where the lighting is controlled." He rose and guided us back to the gallery. The suspects trailed behind, uneasily aware of what awaited. The tapestry hung between two tall windows, now curtained to remove external glare. Poirot produced from his coat a small folding lamp, its beam directed squarely upon the lower border. "Last night," Poirot murmured, "I noted the removal of the cipher slip, initialed LJD, and its hasty replacement. Yet someone overlooked a finer detail. The solvent used to dissolve the old adhesive left a faint residue." He knelt, unscrewed a tiny vial from the ebony case, and dabbed a few drops of a clear fluid onto the tape's edge. Within moments, a subtle displacement of color appeared, a series of microscopically etched letters in the silver. "Thread." I peered through the magnifying glass. "Letters?" I asked. Poirot smiled. "Yes, Hastings. The letters G.A., not L.J.D. These initials do not belong to Lord Julian Danvers, but to Gerald Ashton, Colonel Ashton's late brother, who perished under mysterious circumstances a decade ago." He tapped the brush gently. "By brushing away the restored thread, one can reveal the hidden inscription." He handed the brush to me. I applied it delicately along the seam, and the letters emerged more clearly. G.A. L.J.D. An arrow stitched in crimson thread pointed toward the luncheon scene above, depicting a masked figure holding a goblet. Miss Phillips gasped. "Colonel Ashton's brother? But why would Gerald Ashton be referenced here?" Poirot rose, turning to face the room. The suspects had formed a semicircle, their faces betraying shock, curiosity, and alarm. "Mesdames et messieurs, you see now the puzzle's heart. Colonel Ashton's brother, Gerald, died in this very county under circumstances never fully explained. Colonel, you once hinted your renovation petitions related to more than mere lodging. You sought to excavate the ancestral chapel on the East Wing grounds, where Gerald's body was interred, to examine a ledger he hid beneath the altar stone." Colonel Ashton's face drained of colour. His voice trembled. Sir Reginald refused my request, insisting the family secrets remain buried. Gerald's ledger contained proof that Sir Reginald, and perhaps his late brother Julian, embezzled funds from the Danvers mills to cover losses in Gerald's failing ventures." Poirot inclined his head. Indeed, thus the tapestry's cipher slip, LJD, was a feint, a diversion planted to implicate Lord Julian. The real grievance, revealed by G.A., points to Gerald Ashton. You, Colonel, sought revenge upon Sir Reginald for concealing your brother's fate. Last night's murder was as much reprisal as silencing. The Colonel rose abruptly, knocking his chair back. "No, I only wanted the truth vindicated." He clenched his fists. "I confronted Reginald in the library. He mocked me, called me a fool for believing in Gerald's innocence." His eyes flicked to Mrs. Barrington. "And when I saw the letter opener, I lost control." Miss Phillips gasped, stepping forward. "You killed him, brother?" Her voice broke. Colonel Ashton swayed, tears brimming. "Yes, I stabbed him. and then I planted the cipher slip in hopes investigators would focus on Julian's death, not Gerald's. He sank back into his chair, head in his hands. Before I could move, Poirot raised a hand. "Not so quickly, Hastings. There is more." He turned to Mr. Crowley. "The arrow in the tapestry points to the goblet. Recall the luncheon when Miss Phillips noted the sugar bowl's misplacement and the tea's oily sheen. The tapestry's banquet scene foreshadowed the poisoning attempt, to test whether suspicion would turn from murder to an accident." Mr. Crowley's face paled. I slipped poison into the teapot after watching Colonel Ashton's agitation at dinner. I believed he would be the next to drink and expose his guilt, or perhaps die, ensuring the truth died with him. He stumbled. I only wanted to silence the one who struck the final blow. Poirot's green eyes regarded him compassionately. "You played a secondary role, an accessory to your own misguided sense of justice." He turned to Mrs. Barrington. "And you, madame, with your serene composure, why did you feign innocence so steadfastly?" She rose elegantly, shoulders squared. "When I learned of Gerald's ledger and its implications for the family, I knew Colonel Ashton would seek vengeance. I followed him to the library, hoping to intervene. I witnessed his attack and discovered the initial cipher slip. Fearing his downfall, I attempted to conceal the evidence, hence repairing the tapestry and hiding the scissors and thread in Miss Montague's satchel." Poirot nodded. "A brave act born of loyalty, yet one that complicated the investigation greatly." He turned to Miss Phillips. "And you, mademoiselle, with your blood on the glove, was that simply your attempt to close the letter opener?" Genevieve Phillips bowed her head. "Yes, monsieur. I wished only to spare Aunt the horror. I had no knowledge of the ledger or Gerald's fate. My involvement was unintentional." Poirot surveyed the assemblage. "Thus we see a chain of conscience. Ashton's motive, avenging Gerald; Crowley's intervention, silencing Ashton; Barrington's cover-up, protecting Ashton; Phillips's compassion, sealing the weapon. Each acted upon what they believed just, but only one struck the fatal blow." He turned to Inspector Leclerc, who had silently re-entered. "Inspector, the murderer is Colonel Ashton. He confessed under the weight of evidence. The others, though implicated in subsequent acts, bear no responsibility for the original crime." Leclerc nodded gravely and moved to place Ashton under arrest. The colonel offered no resistance, his head bowed in contrition. Poirot stepped forward and addressed the tapestry one final time. "Little grey cells, as I always say, flourish upon secrets, motives, and the smallest of details. Tonight, the tapestry has spoken, first in misdirection, then in concealed initials. But truth, like a single golden thread, emerges when one knows where to look." He turned to me. "Hastings, mon ami, let us return to the library. I believe a final word with Lady Danvers and Miss Montague is in order, so that all threads may be tied before tomorrow's dawn." As we departed the gallery, the manor seemed to exhale, its long-held secrets laid bare at last. The first false lead had given way to the real culprit. The secondary mystery had revealed deeper loyalties, and Poirot's secret clue, the etched initials, had guided justice to its inevitable conclusion. Chapter 11. Tensions rise. The arrest of Colonel Ashton sent a ripple of shock through Danvers Manor. Word spread quickly among the household and remaining guests, so that by midday everyone gathered in the grand hall, servants clustered near the door, Lady Danvers supported by Miss Phillips, Mr. Crowley standing apart, and Mrs. Barrington standing elegantly by the hearth. They watched as Inspector Leclerc formally placed the colonel in handcuffs, his uniformed constable guiding him firmly, but without force. Poirot, standing just behind the inspector, surveyed the assembly with calm satisfaction. "Mesdames et messieurs," he announced, voice steady, "the heart of our mystery has been laid bare. Colonel Ashton confessed to Sir Reginald's murder, driven by vengeance for his brother Gerald's dishonoured memory. Yet, as you well know, the story does not end there. Every twist has consequences, and every truth unsettles deeper tensions." Lady Danvers, pale and teary-eyed, steadied herself against the marble balustrade. "My dear friend," she murmured to Mrs. Barrington, "how could this have come to such a pass?" Mrs. Barrington laid a gentle hand on her arm. "Grief and pride," she whispered. "They can drive a man to desperate acts." Miss Phillips, clutching her aunt's handkerchief, stared at the colonel with a mixture of sorrow and betrayal. "He was my uncle's friend," she said softly, "and he was mourning his own brother." Poirot stepped forward. "Indeed, grief renders the mind clouded, but now consider the fallout. Mr. Crowley, your attempt to poison the tea, though born of misguided justice, has endangered innocent lives. You must account for that as well." Crowley bowed his head. "I acted too swiftly," he admitted. "My intention was to stop Colonel Ashton, but I see now the danger I pose to you all." Inspector Leclerc beckoned Crowley aside to record his statement, while two constables escorted Colonel Ashton out through the great wooden doors. The hush that followed felt heavier than any scream. Poirot turned to the remaining party. "Let us retire to the library," he said. "There are matters of restitution and confession to address before we conclude." In the library, Lady Danvers sank into her favourite armchair. Mrs. Barrington settled beside her, and Miss Phillips hovered nearby. Poirot and I took seats opposite them, the tea service once again arranged upon the small table. Poirot poured each lady a cup of tea, mindful of the prior attempt at poisoning. He fixed each cup with his renowned precision, adding sugar for Lady Danvers and a single drop of clotted cream for Mrs. Barrington. "To what end, madame?" Poirot asked Mrs. Barrington gently. "Did you conceal the cipher slip and attempt the repair? What risk did you fear more than dishonour?" Mrs. Barrington lifted her cup with measured grace. "Monsieur, I loved Gerald Ashton as a brother-in-law. When I saw Colonel Ashton confront Sir Reginald in the library, I feared he would destroy Reginald, and thus seal Gerald's disgrace. In a moment of desperation, I hid the evidence and sought to misdirect suspicion onto the staff, hoping to buy time for reconciliation." She sighed. "It was folly, and I regret it." Poirot nodded sympathetically. "A loyalty born of compassion, yet one that complicated justice. You must provide a full statement to Inspector Leclerc." Mrs. Barrington inclined her head. "I will." Poirot then turned to Miss Phillips. "Mademoiselle, your actions in closing the letter opener were humane, yet your ownership of the bloodied glove caused initial suspicion. How do you reconcile your compassion with your fear?" Miss Phillips drew a shaky breath. "When I saw my uncle's body, I only wished to spare my aunt further pain. First, dared not consider evidence or investigation, I thought only of comfort." She paused, tears glistening. "I see now how that interfered with proper procedure." Poirot smiled kindly. "Compassion is never a crime, mademoiselle, but one must allow facts to speak." He placed a delicate sympathy card into her hand. "Your statement will clear your name." Across the room, Mr. Crowley awaited his turn. Poirot addressed him next. "Monsieur, You attempted to poison the tea to stop Colonel Ashton. Your motive, though misguided, was to protect others. Yet the law must take its course. Crowley bowed his head and pressed his lips together. I understand. I will cooperate fully. Poirot rose and signalled to me. Hastings, fetch the ledger Gerald Ashton hid beneath the chapel's altar stone, the one Sir Reginald refused to recover. We must present its contents to Lady Danvers and the inspector. I left and quickly returned with the worn, leather-bound volume, its cover cracked and spine creased. Poirot opened it to the first page, revealing entries in Gerald's neat hand. Financial records, names of co-conspirators, and confessions of embezzlement by Sir Reginald and Julian. Lady Danvers gasped. Julian? My own brother. I never knew. Poirot let the ledger rest upon his lap. Yes, Lady Danvers. Lord Julian assisted his brother Sir Reginald in embezzling funds to stabilise Gerald's failing mills. Gerald discovered the scheme, tried to confront them, and died under suspicious circumstances, officially heart failure, but with unexplained bruising. He looked up. Colonel Ashton sought to vindicate his brother's memory, believing his death was foul. In confronting Sir Reginald, he acted on old pain and resentment. Tears streamed down Lady Danvers's cheeks. I buried both their sins with much ignorance. Poirot extended a handkerchief. Ignorance is no defence, but understanding brings closure. With the Colonel in custody, Mr. Crowley's confession recorded, and Mrs. Barrington's statement ready, the law may proceed. Yet I sense you, Lady Danvers, have another burden, your own grief and betrayal. Lady Danvers nodded. I feel I have lost more than a nephew and a friend. I have lost part of my family's honour. He placed a comforting hand upon hers. Time and truth will heal the wound, madame. For now, let justice take its course and allow the tapestry's secrets to rest. Later that evening, the household gathered in the gallery for a private farewell to Colonel Ashton, who had requested a final moment alone with his brother's memorial tapestry. He stood before the woven banquet, his uniform crisp, but his shoulders stooped, eyes fixed upon the inscription G.A. to L.J.D., etched so recently. In silence, he touched the arrow stitched in crimson, whispering, I'm sorry, Gerald. Then, with his head bowed, he allowed the constable to lead him away. Poirot watched from the doorway, expression thoughtful. He turned to me. Mon ami, the tension that mounted between grief and duty has been laid to rest. He stepped forward, smoothing his coat. Tomorrow, we shall conclude with the final gathering, where the truth is formally presented and justice is delivered. As the Colonel disappeared down the corridor, the gallery felt lighter, as though the tapestry itself sighed. The tapestry that had concealed so many secrets now witnessed their release, and with Poirot's guidance, the final threads of this intricate mystery would soon be tied. Chapter 12. The Confrontation. Late that afternoon, the remaining circle of suspects was summoned once more to the gallery. The tapestry hung between curtained windows, its embroidered banquet scene now illuminated by a single brass lamp. Poirot stood before it, his posture composed, his keen eyes reflecting the soft glow of the lamp. Around him gathered Lady Danvers, Miss Phillips, Mr. Crowley, and Mrs. Barrington, each seated upon a settee arranged in a semicircle. Poirot's voice rang out, measured and calm. Mesdames et messieurs, we have seen the uncovering of secrets, the arrest of Colonel Ashton, and the unmasking of ancillary crimes. Yet one mystery persists, the precise moment when the tapestry's hem was first re-sewn. He paused, allowing the question to settle. I have determined that the restoration took place between 11 and 11:30 last night, yet only one among you could have been present at that hour in the gallery. He turned to Lady Danvers. You retired early, exhausted by shock. She inclined her head, pale. He looked to Miss Phillips. You were in your suite, weeping in grief. Genevieve Phillips pressed a lace handkerchief to her lips and nodded. He regarded Mr. Crowley. You were in the billiard room, nursing brandy. Crowley's gaze dropped to the floor. Finally, Poirot faced Mrs. Barrington. Madam, you claimed to have retired with a headache, yet the tapestry's hem was mended in that precise interval. Pray, tell me, where were you between 11 and 11:30? Mrs. Barrington's expression remained serene, but her fingers tightened around her silk muff. I was in my suite, as I said. I slept. Poirot's green eyes narrowed only slightly. To the untrained gaze, he appeared merely contemplative. Curious. Yet in Sir Reginald's diary, found this morning in his study, he recorded asking his maid for the time at 11:15. He noted chronologically. The time was late. My head ached. Adelaide, I believe, retired early. A faint gasp rippled through the group. Mrs. Barrington's lips parted, and she glanced at the diary page projected by Poirot's gentle illumination. That entry, she stammered. Sir Reginald never wrote that in my presence. Poirot inclined his head. No, madame. He wrote it in his library, immediately after your departure, as he recorded the evening's events. He stepped forward and held the diary aloft. He noted the time of your leaving the gallery, believing you unwell, yet he failed to notice that the hem had been resewn before he left the room. Mrs. Barrington's composure wavered. She lifted a single finger to touch the tapestry's fringe. Monsieur, Poirot's voice remained gentle but insistent. You knew the hem required mending. You possessed the scissors. You entered quietly, thought to conceal your presence, yet Sir Reginald's final entry contradicts your statement of retiring to bed. Her eyes filled with tears. I did not wish to leave him exposed to the truth. Poirot tilted his head. And that admission reveals the truth I sought. You returned to the gallery at 11:15 to repair the hem and to remove your presence after seeing the letter opener lodged in Sir Reginald's chest. She collapsed into a chair, trembling. Yes, I found him. I found the blade open, and I feared... Her voice broke. He stepped closer. You feared that any further discovery would distress Lady Danvers. You acted out of devotion, not malice. Tears streamed down Mrs. Barrington's cheeks as she nodded. I swear I sought only to protect Lady Danvers' peace of mind, to spare her the horror of seeing her friend's body exposed. Poirot's expression softened. Compassion, however noble, cannot excuse deception. You concealed evidence which might have revealed Colonel Ashton's guilt sooner. He turned to the others. So here we have the final piece. Under psychological pressure, Mrs. Barrington revealed knowledge of Sir Reginald's own diary entry, a detail only she could have known if present at that hour. Her presence at the gallery between 11 and 11:30 is no longer deniable. Lady Danvers rose and crossed to Mrs. Barrington, gently embracing her. My dear friend, she whispered, you tried to spare me. I understand. Poirot looked to Miss Phillips. And you, mademoiselle, may rest assured that your actions were guided by innocence. Genevieve Phillips exhaled, relief flooding her features. He then addressed Mr. Crowley. Monsieur, your attempt to poison stemmed from a desire to protect, but you too now know the entire sequence of events. Crowley bowed his head deeply. Poirot clasped his hands together. Mesdames et messieurs, the confrontation is concluded. Every secret has been laid bare by gentle yet persistent pressure. The timeline is complete, and the acts of compassion and misdirection have been understood for what they were. He turned to me. Hastings, fetch Inspector Leclerc. It is time for the final gathering. As I left to summon the inspector, Poirot addressed the assembly one final time. Soon we shall reconstruct the sequence of events before Lady Danvers and the officials, ensuring that justice is tempered with mercy where appropriate, and that every act, whether of malice or kindness, is acknowledged. In the gallery's hush, the tapestry's figures danced silently, as though awaiting the grand reveal that would bring this intricate drama to its close. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. The manor lay silent beneath a shroud of midnight mist, the corridors deserted save for the soft echo of my footsteps and Poirot's measured strides. Earlier, we had concluded the confrontation in the gallery, and Inspector Leclerc had taken formal statements from the remaining suspects. Colonel Ashton remained in the custody of Constable Davies, detained in a spare sitting room until the morning. Poirot and I retired to his study to organize our final presentation, confident that the net had closed around the primary culprit. Yet no sooner had I settled into a leather armchair, pen poised above my notebook, than a faint, urgent tapping reached my ears, like fingernails rapping against glass. I stiffened and exchanged a glance with Poirot. He laid aside his papers, sensing as I did that something was amiss. "Mon ami," Poirot murmured, "we are not alone in our vigil." He rose, his posture imperceptibly coiled, and moved toward the study window overlooking the conservatory. There, the tall panes reflected the dim lamplight, yet in one pane I thought I discerned a movement, an outline pressed against the glass. Poirot slipped a finger to his lips. Silence. He reached down to his coat and retrieved the small folding lamp and his ebony walking stick. Drawing back the heavy drapery, he peered into the gloom. I followed, heart pounding. In the conservatory beyond, the silhouettes of palm fronds and gardenias shifted in a patch of stale air. Then, by the central fountain, I saw him. Colonel Ashton, his uniform dishevelled, handcuffs dangling from one wrist. He crouched beside a low bench, the other cuff broken away, a jagged indentation in the iron where he had managed to snap the chain. Leclerc's constable, stationed nearby to guard the officers' quarters, lay unconscious upon the floor, his truncheon still clutched in one hand. A single blow to the temple had been sufficient. Ashton, a man driven by grief and desperation, had seized the guard's keys, released himself, and now prepared to flee into the night. Poirot did not hesitate. He opened the sash quietly and slipped through the gap, lamp in one hand, stick in the other. I followed close behind. The glass door hissed as it opened, and Ashton froze, crouched beside the stone fountain whose waters glinted silver under the lamp's beam. "Colonel Ashton," Poirot called softly, stepping into the conservatory. His voice echoed among the glass and wrought iron. "You have your freedom, fleeting as it may be. But consider this, to what end do you flee?" Ashton rose slowly, shoulders slumped, his face pale beneath his peaked cap. The broken cuff still clung to one wrist, the other hung empty. In his hand, he held the leather-bound ledger of Gerald Ashton, stolen earlier from the library, to which he had attached a length of crimson thread. "I will not spend another day behind bars, Monsieur Poirot," Ashton whispered, his voice raw. "If I am to face justice, let it be on my own terms, but this ledger," he thrust the volumes forward, "will die with me. and no one will have proof of Julian and Reginald's guilt. His gaze flicked to the tapestry framed by moonlight. I will see the ledger buried beneath Gerald's memorial in the chapel grounds, where it belongs. Poirot's grey gaze remained steady. You would consign the record of injustice to oblivion, so that the sins of the brothers remain hidden and your own crime goes unsolved? He tapped the ledger lightly with his stick. But you forget that within these pages live more than accusations. They contain names of living persons who must face consequences. And the ledger, like the tapestry's cipher, is a witness to the enduring truth. Ashton's hands shook. He took a step toward the fountain as though driven by a desperate resolve. Then I shall escape this place and disappear beyond the estate. In the distance I will find obscurity and perhaps vengeance upon those who wronged Gerald. His voice broke on the last word. Poirot advanced, folding his lamp under one arm. As you wish, but even in flight, you carry your conscience with you. Each step you take will echo with the blood you shed. Tell me, Colonel, will you truly abandon your honor and your brother's memory to protect your own skin? Ashton's eyes glistened. He pressed the ledger to his chest. I do not know. Poirot's expression softened with genuine compassion. Mon Colonel, in your grief you have already sacrificed much, your friendship, your reputation, and the trust of those who cared for you. But you may yet choose the path of redemption. Return to Inspector Leclerc, face the consequences of your actions, and ensure this ledger endures. Let the truth be known, so that Gerald's name is cleared and Reginald's misdeeds are recorded. Only then can you reconcile the past. As the final syllables fell, Constable Davies groaned and rose, blinking in the lamplight, the stunned blow to his temple fading from memory. He reached for his handcuffs only to find them gone, glanced at Ashton, and then at Poirot. In that moment of hesitation, between flight and confession, Ashton's resolve faltered. He lowered the ledger, shoulders sagging with exhaustion and relief. The broken cuff clattered to the stone floor. "Inspector," Poirot called, raising his voice so Davies could hear. "The fugitive returns willingly." He motioned to Ashton. "Colonel, lay down the ledger and accompany the constable." Ashton placed the volume on the fountain's rim and allowed Davies to slip the remaining handcuff back into place. He paused to look at the ledger, his eyes full of sorrow, then nodded. "Very well." Poirot laid a gentle hand on the colonel's shoulder. "Courage, mon colonel. You have chosen truth at last." As Davies guided Ashton from the conservatory, Poirot turned to me, lamp in hand. The attempted escape was a final testament to desperation. But in succumbing to conscience, Colonel Ashton has provided the key to the ledger's fate, and to the full revelation that awaits us at the final gathering. Outside, the mist curled across the gardens like silent witnesses. Within the manor, the tapestry's figures watched in woven stillness, awaiting the ultimate resolution of lives and betrayals. And with the desperate escape foiled, only one more confrontation remained before justice and closure could be achieved. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. The following morning, a crisp chill gripped Danvers Manor. Dew clung to the gardens, and the gravel paths crunched beneath one's feet, as I followed Poirot toward the chapel grounds where Gerald Ashton's tomb lay beneath a slender yew. Inspector Leclerc and Constable Davies flanked us, while Miss Phillips and Mrs. Barrington lingered politely at the manor's thresholds, their breath forming faint clouds in the dawn air. Poirot carried the leather-bound ledger carefully, as though its weight were both physical and moral. He paused before the tombstone, a simple slab of pale grey marble inscribed with Gerald's name and dates, and set the ledger upon a flat stone beside it. "Here, Hastings," he said quietly, motioning for me to approach. "Observe the alignment." He tapped the ledger's spine. Gerald selected this memorial for his final note, believing that truth, buried with him, would remain concealed. Yet he also fashioned a cipher and wove its key into the tapestry to guide the worthy to his testament. I bent beside the ledger. The ledger details embezzlements, names, sums, dates, but where is the cipher's key in the tapestry? I glanced upward. The tapestry's banquet scene hung inside the gallery, but sluice shafts of morning light slanted through the chapel's narrow windows, illuminating the folded ledger. Poirot smiled. "Recall the arrow stitched in crimson, pointing from G.A. to the goblet. A goblet, a cup, echoed in the ledger's cover art, a stylized chalice embossed in brass." He tapped the ledger's clasp. "Now, open it to the first blank page." I unlatched the clasp and turned to the front, where an inscription in Gerald's spidery hand read, "In Tapestry's feast, note the third chalice beneath the knight's raised sword, count 7 stitches from the left, then follow the thread of silver." Poirot's eyes gleamed. 17 decades old, yet unaltered, a precise instruction. The third chalice in the tapestry's upper border, beneath a knight whose sword arches over a falcon, leads to the point where the cipher was concealed. I pictured the tapestry, a banquet table laden with goblets, knights in gleaming armor, a falcon embroidered above one. 7 stitches from the left, I whispered, and the arrow in the lower border marks the point. Poirot nodded. The murderer, Colonel Ashton, missed this link in his haste. He removed the slip from the lower hem, believing its initials, LJD, would cloud the trail. But he never sought the cipher's true message, engraved into the ledger's first page. I closed the ledger gently. "And Lady Danvers, does she wish it published?" Poirot glanced back toward the manor. "That decision rests with her, Hastings, but first we must convey the full revelation." He gestured to Inspector Leclerc. "Inspector, shall we return to the gallery for the final gathering?" Leclerc dipped his head. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot." Back in the gallery, the suspects had been summoned at dawn's first light. The tapestry hung silent, now illuminated by overhead lamps that cast its intricate scenes into sharp relief. At Poirot's signal, Lady Danvers, Miss Phillips, Mr. Crowley, and Mrs. Barrington entered, their expressions grave yet expectant. Poirot stood before the tapestry, ledger in hand. Inspector Leclerc and I took positions to either side of him. The barred windows permitted no distraction. The gallery, once a site of intrigue, was now a consecrated arena for truth. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, voice resonant, "we stand at the culmination of our inquiry. Colonel Ashton, now in custody, has confessed to Sir Reginald's murder, an act born of vengeance for his brother Gerald's dishonour. Mr. Crowley, you admitted to attempting to poison the tea, seeking to prevent further tragedy. Mrs. Barrington, you concealed evidence in a misguided attempt to protect Lady Danvers. And Miss Phillips, you acted from compassion." He paused, allowing each to meet his gaze. "Yet beneath these acts lies the heart of the mystery, the cipher devised by Gerald Ashton, concealed within this tapestry." He held the ledger aloft. In its pages, Gerald recorded the embezzlement of Danvers textile mills by Sir Reginald and Lord Julian. He then hid the ledger beneath his tomb, entrusting its revelation to a cleverly woven riddle. He opened the ledger to the inscription. The riddle reads, "In Tapestry's feast, note the third chalice beneath the knight's raised sword." He trailed his finger, and so on, guiding the worthy to this very sight. He closed the ledger with a soft snap. "Colonel Ashton, did you follow this instruction?" Colonel Ashton stood in the doorway, escorted by Constable Davies. His uniform was neat, though his eyes bore the weariness of a soul unburdened by truth at last. He stepped forward. I did not, monsieur. In my haste I saw only the initials and removed the slip, believing it implicated Lord Julian. I never read the riddle, nor did I seek the true message." He bowed his head. "Forgive my folly." Poirot inclined his head. "Your haste cost us precious time, but did not prevent the eventual revelation. And now, Lady Danvers," he turned to her, "you may decide the ledger's fate." Lady Danvers approached the tapestry, her hand resting on its embroidered surface. She turned to face the group. "Gerald Ashton was wronged twice, once in life, once in death. His riddle, though concealed in cloth and thread, sought justice. I will publish the ledger in full, exposing the embezzlement so that the Danvers Mills may be restored in honour and Gerald's name redeemed." A murmur of assent rippled through the group. Miss Phillips bowed her head in relief. Mr. Crowley nodded solemnly. Mrs. Barrington dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Poirot smiled gently. Then, justice, once obscured, is achieved at last. The tapestry, which concealed the truth, now stands as a testament to the power of reason and the tenacity of the human spirit. Inspector Leclerc stepped forward. "I shall ensure that Colonel Ashton's confession and the ledger's contents are entered into the official record. The matter is closed." As the inspector's constables ushered Colonel Ashton back into custody, Poirot regarded the tapestry with quiet satisfaction. "Mon ami Hastings," he said softly, turning to me, "the final piece has fallen into place. Our tapestry of events, murder, misdirection, mercy, has been unravelled, stitch by stitch." I closed my notebook, the weight of his words settling over me like a benediction. Outside, the morning sun burned away the mist, casting Danvers Manor in bright clarity. Within its walls, the echoes of suspicion faded, replaced by the peace that follows truth's triumph, and as the suspects dispersed, each to face the consequences of their actions, I knew that Poirot's little grey cells had once again woven order from chaos, leaving behind a tapestry of justice as intricate and enduring as the one upon the wall. Tomorrow's dawn would bring new beginnings, but for now the story was complete, its final chapter sealed in the light of revelation. Chapter 15. The Final Gathering. The grand drawing room of Danvers Manor was transformed into a solemn chamber of justice. Heavy velvet draperies had been drawn back, allowing the golden afternoon sun to pour in through tall mullioned windows, illuminating the polished parquet floor and the rows of high-backed chairs arranged in a careful semicircle. A long mahogany table stood at the far end, bearing Sir Reginald's leather-bound ledger and the original cipher slip, now safely mounted on a velvet cushion. At the head of the room, beneath a portrait of Sir Reginald and his late brother Julian, stood Hercule Poirot, his grey suit immaculate, and his moustaches waxed to perfection. One by one, the assembled party entered and took their seats. Lady Danvers, draped in mourning black, softened by a brooch bearing Gerald Ashton's initials, sat to Poirot's right. Miss Genevieve Phillips, still pale but resolute, settled beside her aunt. Mrs. Adelaide Barrington followed, her composure restored by gratitude and relief. Mr. Theodore Crowley entered last, his face sober beneath a furrowed brow, and took the final chair. Across from them, Inspector Leclerc and Constable Davies hovered near the door, ready to record every word. Poirot held his hands before him, fingers lightly interlaced. He cleared his throat, and a hush fell. Mesdames et messieurs, thank you for convening on this final occasion. We gather not only to recount the events that have transpired, but to bring closure, to ensure that every action, every motive, and every hidden thread is understood, documented, and laid to rest. He gestured to the open ledger on the table. Here lies Gerald Ashton's testament, his meticulous record of embezzlement carried out by Sir Reginald and Lord Julian. His cipher, concealed in the tapestry, was a call for justice beyond the grave. Colonel Ashton retrieved portions of this truth in his anguish, but in his haste he committed a grievous crime, the murder of Sir Reginald. Lady Danvers pressed her lips together, tears glimmering. My dear friend, my brother, both implicated in deception, yet they both cared for Gerald in their own ways. Poirot inclined his head sympathetically. It is a painful dichotomy, madame. In the pursuit of financial security, they betrayed family bonds. Gerald's righteous indignation drove the colonel to avenge his brother's honour, an honour restored here, albeit through tragic means. He turned to Miss Phillips. Mademoiselle, you discovered the cipher slip and showed remarkable restraint. Your compassion in closing the letter opener demonstrated your integrity, even as you feared implicating yourself. Genevieve Phillips drew a steadying breath. I only wish to spare my aunt further pain. I am grateful that justice has prevailed. Poirot smiled. Your actions remind us that empathy, though well-intended, must never eclipse the search for truth. He then addressed Mr. Crowley. Monsieur, you sought to prevent another tragedy by introducing poison into the teapot, a misguided intervention that endangered all present. Your confession and cooperation with Inspector Leclerc mitigated the consequences. Crowley inclined his head. I acted out of fear and frustration, monsieur. I regret my haste, but I sought to protect those I respect. Poirot placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Intentions, though noble, must align with method. You have acknowledged your error, and that is a form of accountability. He next turned to Mrs. Barrington. Madame, your concealment of the cipher slip and your repair of the tapestry hampered our investigation, but emerged from loyalty and compassion. In revealing your presence at the gallery, you demonstrated courage in admitting your complicity. Mrs. Barrington looked down, her voice soft but clear. I am ashamed of my deception, yet I could not bear the thought of Lady Danvers discovering her friend's death in such a brutal form. Poirot inclined his head. A compassionate heart can err through protective instinct. Your contrition and cooperation have aided the restoration of truth. He paused, letting each reflection resonate. Then, turning back to the ledger, he addressed Lady Danvers. Madame, as the custodian of your family's name, you now hold the choice of how to honour Gerald's memory and to reconcile the legacies of Sir Reginald and Lord Julian. Lady Danvers rose gracefully. She moved to the table and laid a hand upon the ledger. I will commission its publication and ensure that the names inscribed within are known to those with authority to enact reform in the textile mills. My family's name will bear the shame of betrayal, but also stand for transparency and renewal. A chorus of assent rose softly. Hear, hear, from Miss Phillips. Mrs. Barrington dabbed at her eyes. Crowley nodded solemnly. Poirot closed the ledger with a gentle snap. Then justice will be served, both legal and moral. Now let us reconstruct the sequence of events, that the official record may reflect the precise chronology and the myriad actions that wove together this tapestry of tragedy and redemption. Inspector Leclerc stepped forward, opening his notebook. Very well, Monsieur Poirot. Please outline the timeline. Poirot raised a slender finger. At approximately 10:45 p.m. on the night of the banquet, Colonel Ashton confronted Sir Reginald in the library regarding Gerald's ledger. In the ensuing altercation, he struck Sir Reginald with the gilt letter opener, causing his death. The Colonel then removed the cipher slip from the tapestry's lower hem, planting it to implicate Lord Julian, and attempted to conceal his tampering by reweaving the stitch, before Sir Reginald's maid nearly discovered him. He paused. By 11:15 p.m., Mrs. Barrington, upon encountering the open letter opener, feared for Lady Danvers's peace and repaired the tapestry's hem, hiding the scissors and thread in Miss Montague's satchel. Miss Phillips interjected softly. I closed the blade and retrieved the letter opener to spare Lady Danvers the horror, unaware of its evidentiary value. Poirot inclined his head, acknowledging her. Indeed. At dawn's first light, Mr. Crowley, sensing irregularities in Colonel Ashton's behaviour, introduced a small dose of aconite into the tea to incapacitate, though not to lethally harm, the Colonel, hoping to force a confession. He continued, Later that morning, discovery of the poisoning attempt and consultation of Sir Reginald's diary led me to question the maid about the satchel, revealing Mrs. Barrington's concealment. Confrontations ensued in the gallery, leading to Colonel Ashton's initial confession under evidence of etched initials. His subsequent attempted flight from custody concluded with his voluntary return and full admission. He closed his eyes briefly, then looked to the inspector. That is the complete sequence, Inspector. Leclerc nodded. I shall include these details in my report. The charges will reflect the murder, the attempted poisoning, and the various acts of obstruction, though mitigation may be considered for compassion-driven actions. Poirot offered a final observation. In every human heart lie the seeds of both darkness and light. The tapestry and the ledger reveal that truth, though woven with deceit, cannot be entirely hidden. It must be uncovered by patience, by the smallest clue, and by unwavering dedication to justice. He turned to us one last time. Mes amis, the final gathering is complete. The story ends not with vengeance alone, but with the promise of renewal, of families restored and mistakes acknowledged. Let us now allow the law to follow its course and the dawn to usher in a more honest era for Danvers Manor. As Inspector Leclerc guided the suspects and Mr. Crowley to the door, and Lady Danvers and her companions gathered to discuss the ledger's publication, I stood beside Poirot. He looked at the tapestry, its embroidered figures frozen mid-celebration, and offered a small nod. The feast is over, mon ami, he murmured. The last threads have been untangled, and justice, like the morning sun, shines upon every hidden seam. I closed my notebook, the weight of the case lifting, confident that Danvers Manor would remember this day not only for its sorrow, but for the triumph of truth over secrecy. Chapter 16. The Reveal. The late afternoon light slanted through the drawing-room's tall windows as Poirot rose from his seat at the head of the mahogany table. The ledger lay closed before him, its pages safely documented. Inspector Leclerc and Constable Davies stood ready, pens poised over their notebooks. Lady Danvers, Miss Phillips, Mrs. Barrington, and Mr. Crowley sat in solemn expectation. Even the servants, summoned at Poirot's discreet request, lingered near the doorway, silent witnesses to this final declaration. Poirot tapped the table gently with his cane. Mesdames et messieurs, I thank you again for assembling so willingly. We have already reviewed the chronology and responsibilities of each party. Yet there remains the matter of the crucial, fatal mistake, the one detail that irrevocably exposed the murderer and brought the tapestry's cipher to light. He paused, surveying each face. "Allow me to reconstruct that moment." He walked to the far end of the room, near the portrait of Sir Reginald, and retrieved the gilt letter opener from its velvet-lined box. Holding it aloft, he continued, "It was within this very instrument that the Colonel struck the fatal blow. Yet the blade's unique pattern, a serrated edge with an unusual scallop, revealed more than mere violence." He laid the opener across a white cloth and gestured for everyone to lean forward. "Observe here," Poirot said, pointing with his cane to a faint scuff on the scalloped edge. A tiny nick, scarcely noticeable, yet present in all subsequent impressions left by the blade. I discovered this mark only when I compared the opener to Sir Reginald's desk, specifically the small gouge in the mahogany wood, matching the opener's edge. He looked to Inspector Leclerc. "You marked that gouge upon arrival?" Leclerc nodded. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. I noted it, but did not at first connect it to the blade." "Indeed," Poirot agreed. "All other counts, bloodstains, gunpowder residue, paint flecks, were shared or misleading. But the gouge was singular, linking the specific opener to the moment of impact. Yet the true revelation lay in the cipher's concealment and subsequent tampering." He picked up a sheet of magnified photographs showing the tapestry's hem before and after the Colonel's repair. "Here," he said, pointing to the pre-repair image. "You see the missing stitch at point GA, initials crudely cut, revealing the cipher slip beneath. Then, in the repaired image, notice the subtle misalignment. The silver thread's twist differs by 2 degrees at the 12th stitch from the left." He tapped the photo. That misalignment betrayed a hurried reweaving, one that, when examined under magnification, matched the sheen and thickness of the embroidery floss found in Colonel Ashton's personal stash. He turned to Colonel Ashton, seated with his arms respectfully folded. "Colonel, you claim to have re-sewn the hem with thread from your own sash, a worn accessory gifted by your late brother, and then hidden the scissors in the maid's satchel. Yet the thread's precise diameter and the twist pattern could only have come from the sash's fringe, not your gloves or handkerchiefs. When I examined your quarters, I found a length of identical silver floss torn from that very sash. You were careful, but not careful enough." A hush fell as Colonel Ashton bowed his head. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. In my grief, I believed I could erase all trace of my deed. But my own regret lay in forgetting the sash's unique thread." He closed his eyes for a moment, as though in penance. Poirot nodded gravely and set the photographs aside. Next, the riddle's arrow, stitched in crimson, directed us to the goblet under the knight's raised sword. You, Mr. Crowley, observed the arrow and correctly deduced its significance. Though your attempt at poisoning was premised on a misinterpretation, you believed the goblet signified tea, whereas it denoted the act of hospitality and trust. You tested your theory by lacing the teapot's brew. He paused, giving Crowley a moment to acknowledge. Crowley's eyes glistened. Nevertheless, it was your confession to the poisoning that alerted me to the possibility of another clue beyond the hem waiting to be found. He turned back to the group. Now, consider Mrs. Barrington, who mended the hem at 11:15. Her admission of presence in the gallery during that window, corroborated by Sir Reginald's diary entry, confirmed the timeline. Yet her motive was compassion, not guilt. She feared Lady Danvers's heartbreak. Still, it was her confirmation of the timing that tied the hem's repair to Colonel Ashton's hurried tampering. closing the circle of opportunity. Mrs. Barrington's shoulders shook, and she dabbed at her eyes. Poirot offered her a gentle nod. "Your honesty redeemed your error, madame." Poirot then walked back to the center of the room, resting his cane against the table. "And finally, Miss Phillips, you discovered the cipher slip first, yet chose mercy over procedure. Your glove preserved the blade's blood but concealed nothing more. In sparing your aunt further horror, you delayed its discovery by mere minutes, not of import to the murderer, but crucial to the sequence that followed." Genevieve Phillips inhaled sharply. I understand, monsieur." Poirot fixed each in turn with a calm gaze. Thus, the fatal mistake was Colonel Ashton's oversight of the sash's unique silver floss and the blade's nick. That combination, uncovered through careful comparison, left no doubt as to the instrument and individual responsible. The tapestry's cipher and the ledger's riddle merely guided us to where our little grey cells could confirm it. He smiled softly. And so, justice is not a single act, but the convergence of many small truths, each stitch, each mark, each hesitation adding up until the pattern becomes clear. Inspector Leclerc closed his notebook. "Very well, Monsieur Poirot, I shall include these findings in the official report. Colonel Ashton, you are formally charged with the murder of Sir Reginald Danvers." He stepped forward to read the charge. Davies moved to secure Ashton's arm, and the colonel rose, dignity intact, to follow them toward the door. As Colonel Ashton passed Lady Danvers, he paused. "Madame, I beg your forgiveness, not for avenging Gerald, but for the anguish I have caused." Lady Danvers, tears in her eyes, placed a hand on his arm. "I forgive you," she whispered. When the door closed behind them, Poirot turned back to the remaining party. "Mesdames et messieurs, the reveal is complete. The tapestry, the ledger, the blade, and the sash's thread have spoken. Let us now allow the manor to heal, and let the records of Gerald Ashton's courage and Sir Reginald's failings guide future generations." He stretched, then offered each a courteous bow. With the fatal mistake exposed and justice set in motion, we may look forward to brighter days at Danvers Manor, days built on truth rather than concealment. As Lady Danvers and her companions rose to embrace one another, and Inspector Leclerc prepared to depart with Colonel Ashton in tow, I closed my notebook and exchanged a satisfied glance with Poirot. "Mon ami," he said quietly, "the tapestry's secret is now unmasked and the final stitch of truth secured. All that remains is to witness the resolution of lives forever altered by this affair." I nodded, knowing that in the hush that followed, the echo of Poirot's reveal would linger within Danvers. Manner as a tribute to the power of observation, deduction, and above all, the courage to confront one's own errors. Chapter 17, Outcome and Justice. In the soft glow of early evening, Danvers Manor hummed with an unusual quietude. The day's revelations had passed like a sudden storm, leaving behind a fragile stillness that settled over the ancient halls. Guests mingled in small clusters, their voices hushed but relieved, while servants moved about discreetly, removing signs of the tragedy, folding away the velvet cushion that had borne the cipher slip, and returning the drawing-room's mahogany table to its customary array. All of it prepared for the formal administration of justice and for the tentative healing to follow. Lady Danvers stood beside the portrait of her late brother and nephew, hands clasped over her brooch that bore Gerald Ashton's initials. Miss Phillips had taken her aunt's other hand, offering a steadying presence. Mrs. Barrington lingered nearby, pale but composed, and Mr. Crowley surveyed the room with a sober air. Poirot, his expression inscrutable, approached them with measured steps. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said softly, "we have seen the tapestry's cipher vindicate Gerald Ashton's memory, and Colonel Ashton's misdeed brought to light. Now we must attend to the outcomes, both legal and moral, of this affair." He inclined his head to Inspector Leclerc, who entered with official documents in hand. Leclerc cleared his throat. "First, the charges. Colonel Gerald Ashton's son, Colonel Ashton, will stand trial for the murder of Sir Reginald Danvers. The court will consider his motive, avenging his brother's dishonour, and his subsequent escape attempt, though his ultimate return and confession may serve as mitigating circumstances." He handed Lady Danvers a parchment bearing the formal charge. "Madam, this is for your record." Lady Danvers accepted it with trembling fingers, her eyes glistening. Poirot gestured to Mr. Crowley. "Monsieur, your attempted poisoning will be noted as assault and attempted homicide. However, given your prompt confession and lack of intent to kill, I anticipate that the court may impose a lenient sentence, perhaps a fine and community service within the county." Crowley bowed his head. "I accept the consequences, monsieur." Next, Poirot addressed Mrs. Barrington. "Madame, your concealment of evidence and tampering with the tapestry constitute obstruction of justice. Yet your actions arose from compassion, not malice. I trust Inspector Leclerc and the Crown will grant you leniency, perhaps probation, rather than imprisonment." She inclined her head, relief and remorse mingling on her face. Inspector Leclerc nodded. "I shall recommend mercy in your case, considering the circumstances." Finally, Poirot turned to Miss Phillips. "Mademoiselle, your compassion in closing the letter opener does not constitute a crime. You will, however, be asked to provide a formal statement clarifying your actions for the record." Genevieve Phillips exhaled, smiling wanly. "I will. Thank you, monsieur." With the legal matters outlined, Poirot raised his cane. "Now let us discuss the moral restitution owed to Gerald Ashton and to Danvers Manor itself." He led the group to the long table, where the ledger lay open to its first page, now ready for transcription. Lady Danvers approached and read aloud a formal declaration. "I, Reginald Danvers, in acknowledgement of the truth revealed by Gerald Ashton's testament, hereby commit to full transparency in the administration of the Danvers textile mills. I will appoint an independent commission to review the company's financial records, rectify any discrepancies, and compensate those wronged by my actions. May Gerald's memory guide us toward integrity and renewal." Her voice wavered but grew steadier as she concluded. Miss Phillips dabbed a tear from her cheek. "His legacy will not be forgotten." Mrs. Barrington stepped forward to affix her signature, followed by Messrs. Crowley and Phillips, each adding their pledge to support the Commission's work and to uphold Gerald's vision of justice. Poirot watched with satisfaction. Thus, the ledger's contents will not lie buried beneath a tomb, but will reshape the future of the mills and of this community. Justice, both legal and ethical, moves forward together. Across the room, a soft murmur began as servants brought forth plats of fruit and delicate pastries, along with fresh tea, a tribute to life's continuance beyond sorrow. Lady Danvers invited the group to partake, and they clustered around small tables, sampling the fare with tentative smiles. I stood aside, watching the scene unfold. Poirot joined me, his posture calm. "Mon ami," he murmured. "Observe how the human spirit rebounds. The tapestry hid betrayal, but it also held the key to redemption. Likewise, the ledger revealed wrongdoing, yet through its publication, we restore trust. He picked up a pastry delicately and took a thoughtful bite. I nodded. The manor, the mills, the lives it touches, all will benefit from truth, however painful, and Gerald Ashton's name will live in honor. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Indeed, and perhaps this affair will serve as a cautionary tale, that even the most intricate webs of deception can be unraveled by patience, observation, and the smallest details. A nick in a blade, a misplaced stitch, a hidden cipher. He sipped his tea. A soft bell chimed from the manor's clock tower, sounding the hour of early evening. Lady Danvers rose, addressing her friends. Let us remember today's trials as the day we chose honesty over comfort, and compassion coupled with accountability. Gerald's dream shall guide us forward. The guests exchanged gentle nods and took one another's hands. In that moment, the weight of the past lightened, replaced by a shared resolve to honor truth and to forge a more just legacy. As the company pressed forward into the hall to take their leave, Poirot and I lingered by the hearth. He brushed a stray lock of hair from his eyes and sighed contentedly. Outcome and justice, Hastings, he said softly. Not merely punishment, but restitution. Not merely revelation, but renewal. I closed my notebook, the final entry written. Well said, Poirot. The affair at the tapestry and the puzzle of the needle in the tapestry have reached their conclusion. One paved by little grey cells and by the courage to face one's own deeds. He offered his arm. Come, mon ami. Let us walk the gardens and enjoy the peace that follows justice. For tomorrow, life at Danvers Manor shall bloom anew, nourished by the light of truth. And so we stepped into the marble-floored corridor, leaving behind the drawing room where the final gathering had restored order to chaos. Outside, the gardens beckoned, and with them, the promise of brighter days ahead. Chapter 18. The Closing Remark. The sun had dipped low behind the rolling Wiltshire hills when Hercule Poirot and I stepped into the gardens of Danvers Manor. The air held the faint tang of autumn, crisp, clear, and tinged with the promise of renewal. Lady Danvers had retired to her study to draft the final notice of the Textile Commission, while Miss Phillips, Mrs. Barrington, and Mr. Crowley met in the library to finalize their statements. The household, relieved of its burdens, moved with quiet purpose, tending to chores and preparing for a calmer season ahead. Poirot paused by a stone bench beneath an ancient yew, the same that sheltered Gerald Ashton's tomb, and gazed across the manicured parterres. The tapestry, stored safely in the gallery, no longer cast its haunting banquet scene upon the walls. Instead, it awaited its journey to the County Museum, where its stitches and secrets would be studied as an artistic marvel and a testament to Poirot's deductive mastery. Mon ami, Poirot murmured. The case is concluded, yet the work we have done will continue to echo through this estate and beyond. Let us reflect upon the lessons learned. I seated myself upon the bench, watching squirrels chase one another through the leaf-strewn grass. Indeed, Poirot, so many lives were touched by deceit and compassion alike. Yet through each layer of misdirection, the smallest truths guided us forward. He inclined his head. The missing stitch, the etched initials, the nick in the blade, each minute detail led us along the thread of justice. But more than that, we witnessed the complexity of human motive, love and grief, loyalty and fear, each driving our suspects to act in ways both noble and tragic. A gentle breeze stirred, rustling the yew's needles overhead. Poirot's gaze softened. Lady Danvers has shown remarkable fortitude, a woman who confronted the betrayal of her own blood and chose transparency over denial. She ensures Gerald Ashton's legacy will not be buried beneath silence, but honored through integrity. I thought of Genevieve, whose compassion nearly derailed the investigation, and of Mrs. Barrington, whose loyalty compelled her to deception. "And what of our other friends?" I asked. Miss Phillips learned that mercy must not eclipse truth. Mrs. Barrington discovered the cost of protective instinct. Mr. Crowley faced the danger of rash intervention. Each will carry this knowledge forward. Poirot smiled. "Yes, we do not judge them harshly, my friend, for they acted upon the best of intentions. It is our task to temper justice with mercy, acknowledging both the errors and the courage of their hearts." He stood and offered me his arm. We wandered along a path bordered by chrysanthemums and late roses. In the distance, the faint clang of the village church bells marked the hour. "Now," Poirot said, "it falls to us to bid farewell to Danvers Manor and to its inhabitants, forever changed." He looked toward the manor's silhouette against the rose-tinged sky. "I trust you will accompany me to the front terrace, where we shall take leave of Lady Danvers and our companions." Moments later, we emerged upon the terrace. The servants had lit lanterns along the balustrade, their warm glow spilling onto the stone steps. Lady Danvers awaited us, framed in the doorway by the soft lamplight. She offered a wan smile. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she greeted, stepping forward. "Thank you for all you have done. You have restored not only justice, but hope." Poirot bowed over her hand with his customary grace. "Madame, it has been my great privilege to serve you. Your resolution to set matters right honors both the living and the departed." Miss Phillips and Mrs. Barrington joined us, standing respectfully. Mr. Crowley appeared at her side, his expression earnest. Lady Danvers turned to her friends. "Genevieve, Adelaide, Theodore, our burdens have been heavy, yet we face tomorrow with clearer conscience and stronger bonds." She paused, looking to Poirot. "I hope you might return one day, if only to share tea under these lanterns in happier times." Poirot's grey eyes twinkled. "I should be delighted, madame, but for now our journey continues onward." He addressed us all in a gentle flourish of his cane. "Let us each carry forward the lessons of this affair, the vigilance to notice the tiniest clue, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths." I stepped forward to Lady Danvers. "If you require any assistance with the Commission's work or with the tapestry's cataloguing, you have only to send for me." She smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Hastings. I will not hesitate." Poirot and I bid our farewells and descended the steps. The lanterns flickered behind us, tracing our path down the pebbled drive. Beyond the gates, the open road stretched southward, toward London, and to new adventures awaiting Hercule Poirot's little grey cells. At the gatekeeper's lodge, Poirot paused to address his faithful companion. "Hastings, mon ami, what shall we do next? Perhaps a quiet evening in a cosy inn, with roast fowl and a fine Burgundy." I chuckled. A most agreeable prospect. "And perhaps you might regale me with reflections upon the tapestry one more time. My pen is ever at the ready." He nodded, moustaches twitching in anticipation, then led us away, leaving behind Danvers Manor in good hands and setting our sights upon tomorrow's mysteries. Under a crescent moon, we turned onto the winding lane, our footsteps echoing softly. The manor's lanterns glowed behind us, a beacon of renewal and truth. And as we walked, I reflected that in Poirot's world, every clue, no matter how minute, was a promise that justice, like the dawn, would always break through the night. Thus ends the affair at Danvers Manor, and the puzzle of the needle in the tapestry. May its lessons endure, stitched into the fabric of all who seek the truth.